Hi, Al, this is Frida. I'm just checking my microphone's working.
Yes, it is.
Yes, you're good.
Good, thank you so much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, Mr. Pond, it is 9:30.
Okay, let's go ahead and start the Business Management Committee meeting and welcome everyone. It's been a challenging week to Carly and the operational staff, and we certainly know you've had your challenges, and now we can get back to a board meeting. It reminds me of the old COVID meetings, and I was hoping these formats would not come back, but they're back here today. So first item is Tyree needs to take roll call, and you simply need to affirm that you are present.
Okay, James Durrett,
I'm here.
Roger Frierson,
Present.
Frida Hardage,
Present.
Jennifer Ide, she's on.
Present.
Okay,
here.
Sagira Jones,
Present.
Russell McMurray, Janine Miller, Al Pond,
Present.
Catherine Powers,
Present.
Rita Scott,
Present.
Jacob Zagabe,
Present.
Valencia Williamson,
Present.
Thomas Worthy.
Present.
All right, the first item on the agenda are the minutes. Assume everyone has reviewed those. I'd like need a motion and a second, please.
I move. This is Hardage.
I'll second. This is Powers.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we please vote? And we will do that by going through the list, and Tyree will lead that.
James Durrett,
Approved.
Roger Frierson,
Approved.
Frida Hardage,
Approve.
Jennifer Ide,
Approved.
Sagira Jones,
Approve.
Al Pond,
Approved.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Approved.
Jacob Zagabe,
Approved.
Valencia Williamson,
Approved.
Thomas Worthy.
Approved.
The motion has been approved. The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing the approval of the MARTA's 2025-28 Title VI program, and that'll be led by Paula Nash, our AGM for Diversity and Inclusion. Paula?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Pond, Vice Chair Durrett, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Hurley, and members of the MARTA board. Today, I'm Paula Nash, AGM of Diversity and Inclusion, and today I am presenting on the Title VI program and requesting a resolution authorizing the approval of the program. Next slide, please. As a recipient of federal funds, every 3 years, MARTA must submit a Title VI program to the FTA. The current program expires May 31st, 2025, and the new program will run from June 1st, 2025 through May 31st, 2028. The Title VI program is a compliance program, and this report is meant to show MARTA's compliance. With that being said, most of what I will be referencing in this report is to show that we were in compliance during the previous 3 years. So from 2022 through 2024. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Title VI. So Title VI is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VI essentially says that no person in any federally funded program or activity can be excluded from participation, denied benefits, or discriminated against on the basis of 3 protected classes. And those classes are race, color, and national origin. Then in 1994, President Clinton added a fourth protected class, which was low income status. And it was added because the individuals in that class are more reliant upon federally funded programs. Next slide, please. So here are the objectives of Title VI. The key point is equity. Our service level and quality has to be equitable to all people. We have to monitor, identify, and address if groups are being disproportionately impacted. We must make sure that we are making every effort to include the public in any decisions regarding service. We must prevent the denial, reduction of, or delay in benefits related to programs. And an important part of Title VI is that individuals who do not speak English or speak limited English must be able to use our service and participate in any activities. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of information that must be provided in the Title VI program, but these are the key required documents. And I'll talk further about these as I go through the presentation. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the posting of the Title VI public notification, and that's an example of it on the right. It is posted in stations, ride stores, reduced fare offices, and headquarters, and it informs the public of their civil rights. This version gives the notification in 5 different languages, which is why it looks so dense on there. Also, you can see the Title VI policy statement on the left, which is signed by the GM, and that is on our website. The notice that's on the right is also on the website, but only in English, so it's not this particularly dense form. We are required to let the public know that they have Title VI rights. Next slide, please. This is another document that we are required to have. We're required to have a Title VI complaint policy, procedure, and form. It's also on MARTA's website. If someone has a Title VI complaint, they must have a way to file it with MARTA. This procedure addresses that process. The complaints come to the Department of D&I for investigation. And of course, if an individual can also file a lawsuit, which would go directly to the legal department. Next slide, please. One of the other things we have to provide to the FTA is information on Title VI complaints, investigations, and lawsuits. As this chart shows, there have been no lawsuits or formal complaints during the 2022 through 2024 plan period. However, there have been informal complaints that have come through customer service. Many of the informal complaints center around discourteous operators or the bus being late or not showing up at all. All of our informal complaints have been resolved, and although some have been found to be valid, none have found to be valid due to Title VI violation or discriminatory issues acts. Next slide, please. Recipients of federal funds that have transit service related boards or advisory council or committees must provide information depicting the racial breakdown of the membership. And so this slide shows what we provide to the FTA, which is the racial breakdown of the board of directors, the MARTA Accessibility Committee or MAC, and the Riders Advisory Council or RAC. Next slide, please. We're required to include a limited English proficiency plan, which includes a description of the LEP population that we serve. This chart shows languages spoken at home by the LEP population in MARTA's service area. Other than English, the 5 most spoken languages in order are Spanish, Chinese, which will be Mandarin and Cantonese, Vietnamese, French/Haitian, and Korean. Title VI requires that critical and vital information be translated free of charge. MARTA's website translates information into 6 languages other than English. And then because we meet the FTA's threshold of 5% of our ridership speaking Spanish, we automatically translate vital information into Spanish. Other languages are available upon request. Next slide, please. We're also required to have a public participation plan. So as part of our public participation plan, we must show that we engage with minority and LEP populations and how we went about doing this. Things such as where we held meetings and hearings, coordinations with organizations to target the necessary groups, utilizing certain radio stations or publications, and of course, social media that serve the LEP population. So we provide that kind of information in the plan document. Next slide, please. We must conduct equity analysis anytime that we are building a facility, have major service changes, or change the fare. This slide shows the different types of equity analysis that must be conducted and made available to the FTA, which are facility equity analysis, service equity analysis, and fare equity analysis. During the relevant time period, we had 2 major service changes that required an equity analysis, and that was in April of 2024, and then again in December of 2024. Next slide, please. So with that, I respectfully request the Business Management Committee to recommend the approval of the 2025 through 2028 MARTA Title VI program and authorize its submission to the Federal Transit Administration. Next slide, please. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation, and I turn it back over to you, Chair Pond.
Thank you, Paula. Could we have a motion and a second?
I will move approval. Jim?
This is Hardage. I can second.
A motion by Durick, second by Hardage. Any discussion or questions for Paula? Looks like you did a great job.
Thank
Call
you.
the vote.
Thank you, Paul.
Call the vote. Call the question.
James Durrett,
Yes.
Roger Frison,
Approve.
Rita Hardage,
Approve.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Sagira Jones, Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
So moved.
Jacob Zagabi,
Approved.
Valencia Williamson,
Approve.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes.
Okay, and Sagira Jones. Let's see, she's muted.
Well, we
Okay.
have, the motion's approved.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a contract for armed security guard coverage for the revenue operations and collections, and that'd be led by Michelle Malone, Director of Revenue Operations.
Good morning, Chairman Pond, Vice Chair Durrett, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Hurley, and committee members. My name is Michelle Malone Thompson, Director of Revenue Operations. Today, I will be presenting the resolution requesting the award of a contract for armed guard security coverage for revenue operations, IFB B50381-A. Next slide, please. Armed security guards provide protection for revenue operations personnel during the collection of revenue from Breeze vending machines, A-Park, streetcar, mobility, and all bus garages, as well as during special events such as Peachtree Road Race, Dragon Con, championship games, etc. Next slide, please. The state of Georgia requires armed security guards to be registered through the Secretary of State. Individual guard licenses must be associated with a company license. Next slide, please. 9 security guards are required on a typical day, and additional coverage is required for high ridership special events. Next slide, please. The contract covers a 3-year base period with 2 one-year options for a total of 5 years. This is a reoccurring contract that replaces IFB B48759. Next slide, please. This procurement is being funded with local operating funds from the approved FY25 budget. For subsequent years of the contract will be requested in the annual operating budget. Next slide, please. The notice to bidders was sent to 18 vendors on September 23rd, 2024. 14 firms retrieved the solicitation. Notice of invitation for bids was advertised in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Georgia Procurement Registry, the Georgia Local Government Access Marketplace, and on the website. 5 bids were received on the bid deadline date of October 23rd, 2024. Next slide, please. The 5 bids received were from Allied Universal Security, Vet Securing America, Express Guard LLC, Carter One Enterprises, Reliable Security Staffing LLC. Next slide, please. Universal Protection Service, doing business as Allied Universal Security Services, the lowest bidder and the current provider was determined to be responsive but not responsible due to the inability to meet the requirements of the solicitation. Next slide, please. Vet Securing America submitted the second lowest bid and was determined to be responsive and responsible. Established in 2008, Vet Securing America is a nationwide security firm managed and staffed by veterans. Vet Securing America has 59 armed security officers in the state of Georgia and will have a minimum of 15 officers assigned to MARTA. The DBE goal of 25% was met. Next slide, please. I respectfully request your approval of the resolution authorizing the award of a contract for armed security guard coverage, IFB B50381-A to Vet Securing America. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Worthy
Thank you.
moved.
Durrett was second.
Yeah.
Who moved the motion?
Worthy.
Worthy.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion for Michelle or questions?
I have a question. Strictly
ahead.
out of curiosity. The question, there was on number 5, I believe it stated no bid form. So you mentioned there were 5 bidders. So I just wonder how they would be considered a bidder if they did not include a bid form.
Yeah, that would have to be for CMP because that was what was given to us. Those were the 5.
Good morning, Ms. Scott. This is Jacqueline Holland, Senior Director of Contracts, Procurement, and Materials. They're considered bid because they submitted a bid. They just didn't include their pricing. So we have to include them because they submitted a bid. They just missed their pricing page.
Submitted a bid, but no amount. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so they submit a bid and what they have is no bid. I think that was an error with them, but we can't go back and ask them to submit after the deadline.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
All right.
Ms. Jones? Are there any other questions? If not, we will call the question.
I'm sorry, Al. I'm sorry, I'm late in getting off mute. I have a question.
Okay, Rod?
So I understand that you're going to have 15 officers available, but I think earlier in the presentation, you said you're going to have a minimum of 8 security guards daily that's working with MARTA.
Nine on a typical day.
9 on a typical day. All right.
Yes.
And their primary role is the collection piece, and then secondary role is supportive in other capacities.
Well, they're basically just providing security for the personnel that is collecting revenue.
That's collecting revenue. All right.
Yes.
All right. And so that's not, is that the revenue at the, I'm assuming it's at the fare boxes as well as the buses, bus depots?
Yeah, it's all sales channels. It's at in the rail stations, at the bus garages, at streetcar, mobility, during special events in the station.
Okay. And are they in uniform, MARTA uniform, or in a different uniform?
They have their own security guard uniform.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. I just want to be able to notice when I see them, and I know what their role is when I see them throughout the transit system. All right. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Malone? If not, we'll call the question. Tyreen?
Okay.
Durrett
James,
moves approval. Did we already do that?
You already
Yes.
did that.
Sorry. Yes, I vote yes, Tyreen, sorry.
Okay. Roderick Frierson,
Approved.
Rita Hardage,
Approved.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Yes.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Jacob Zagabi,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson.
Approve.
The
And
Motion-
Thomas Worthy votes yes.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
all right, the
In the
motion,
alphabet over here.
the motion passes. The last item on the agenda is a briefing for the financial highlights and financial performance indicators, and that'll be led by Greg Patterson and also by, my notes here somewhere. I have Greg Patterson. Okay, Greg.
All right, good morning, Chair Pond, Vice Chair Durrett, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Hurley, and members of the Business Management Committee. I'm Greg Patterson, Deputy CFO, and it is my pleasure to present MARTA's financial highlights for the second quarter ended December 31st, 2024. Next slide, please. We'll open it up with the operating actuals to budget highlights. Next slide, please. At a summary level, MARTA budgeted operating sources of $318 million, which includes net revenue and operating carry forward. Our actual revenue was $26.3 million favorable for the quarter. Our net expenses were budgeted at $318 million, but ended the quarter $60.6 million unfavorable to budget. Just like in the results in our first quarter, this was largely driven by third-party liability expenses, which you'll see in the detailed breakdown coming up ahead. The net impact of this was an unfavorable variance of $34.3 million for the second quarter. Next slide, please. Now presenting the detail, I'll start with the favorable revenues. MARTA continues to benefit from a positive sales tax revenue and the favorable balance there of $5 million. And a spot of very good news, MARTA is also favorable in title ad valorem taxes by $26.7 million due to payments from Clayton County that cleared an outstanding balance from January 2017 through December of 2024. Our passenger revenues were unfavorable by $3.7 million cumulative for the year. This is driven by a combination of increased fare vision, and faulty gate equipment at our stations, which our research and analysis team is working with our customer experience team to investigate and identify the causes and submit some corrections. With respect to year-to-date expenses, salaries and wages were favorable by $3.6 million due to higher than forecasted position vacancies. Overtime is unfavorable to budget by $6.5 million, or 33% higher than our forecast. Vacancies and absenteeism are forcing MARTA to execute work at overtime levels. That's time and a half cost rather than straight time rates. And so without it, we really can't deliver our service. Total benefits are also unfavorable to budget right now by $3.7 million, driven primarily by an annual adjustment to non-represented pension benefits. While these experience a spike in costs of their balance in November and December, we expect this to normalize close to our budgeted figures by the end of the fiscal year. Contractual services are $5 million favorable to budget. This was driven by underutilized external support contracts, temporary services contracts, and professional services contracts. Total materials and supplies are favorable to budget by $3.6 million, driven by lower than forecasted costs for fuel and parts. And then our largest hit to expenses is other non-labor, which finished the quarter $42.4 million unfavorable due to a sharp increase in third-party liability expenses. And finally, our capital cost allocation was unfavorable by $20.1 million cumulative. Next slide, please. Moving on to our financial performance for the month of December specifically. Revenues were favorable by $24.7 million and expenses were unfavorable by $23.1 million. The net impact of this was a $1.6 million surplus for the month of December. Next slide, please. Breaking that down on the revenue side, the major noteworthy impact to revenue was the aforementioned title ad valorem tax receipts in Clayton County. This drove our favorable balance by $26.5 million. We had an excellent conversation with the tax commissioner in Clayton County, and they were happy to resolve the outstanding balance with us after some negotiation on what goes into the calculation. I'll move on to other revenues. They were unfavorable by $1.2 million, mainly due to a decrease in advertising revenue. On the expenses side, salaries and wages are unfavorable to budget by $2 million, primarily due to the sale of paid leave. And there was also some increased use of paid leave beyond the budgeted level and some of the accruals for operators, operations supervisors, and mechanics. And we expect this to normalize throughout the fiscal year. Overtime is unfavorable to budget by $1.1 million due to ongoing vacancies and absenteeism. Our total benefits is unfavorable to budget by $4.1 million. For the same reason mentioned in the cumulative summary, it's the annual adjustment to the non-union pension. And other non-labor expenses were unfavorable to budget by $13.9 million due to the third-party liability expenses. And finally, capital charges were unfavorable to budget by $3.4 million due to the lower than forecasted direct and indirect charges to capital projects. Next slide, please. Okay, next slides are going to have our key performance indicators for ridership. Next slide, please. For passenger revenues through our second quarter, we see our revenues consistently falling below our forecast, but are generally outperforming the prior fiscal year. Based on our initial analysis, this reflects our ongoing issue with fare evasion, but may also be impacted by the issue with their fare gates at the station. So go a little more into when we get to the rail ridership slide. Next slide, please. But the good news on the bus ridership figures, we're performing at or above our ridership forecast. The December ridership of 2.8 million unlinked trips matched our forecast and exceeded the prior year by 100,000 trips. Next slide, please. As you can see on this slide, the data is recording that our ridership is below the prior year and our forecast. What we're seeing are some errors in our fare gate system that go beyond fare evasion. There is a disconnect right now between passengers tapping on the fare gate and the system recording the transaction. While a full diagnosis of what's causing the disconnect is still under investigation, we expect that error is artificially depressing both our ridership figures here and possibly delaying the recognition of revenue as well. Next slide, please. Okay, I will now hand this presentation over to Mr. Chetan Agarwal for a review of our capital highlights.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, Chairperson, Vice Chair Direct, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Hurley, and committee members. My name is Chetan Agarwal. I'm the acting AGM of the Centralized Program Management Office, and it's my pleasure to provide an update on MARTA's capital program through the second quarter of fiscal year 2025. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide really shows the cumulative budgeted cash flow projections for our three capital programs, i.e. the State of Good Repair, More MARTA City of Atlanta, and More MARTA Clayton County. Committee members, you may recall from our last meeting that we've implemented a rigorous mathematical model to represent our cash flow projections. We did this by integrating the individual project schedules with the budget data. The chart further shows our planned expenditures for the three programs through the second quarter of fiscal year 2025 at approximately $278 million. Of the $278 million, we expect to spend approximately 70% or $193 million under the State of Good Repair program, approximately 25% or $68.4 million under the More MARTA City of Atlanta program, while the remaining 5% or $16.4 million under the More MARTA Clayton County program. Next slide, please. This slide, or rather the chart on this slide, shows a monthly forecast of the planned expenditures for fiscal year 2025. You may recall that we perform annual accruals at MARTA rather than monthly accruals. And this creates a unique situation where our expenditures are lower during the first few months of the fiscal year. And we start catching up as the year progresses and we start receiving our vendors' invoices. Now, this is a common theme that you will see throughout this presentation, where the total expenditures reported through the end of the second quarter of fiscal year 2025 do not necessarily align with the work that has progressed because our vendors are significantly behind on their billings. Next slide, please. There we go. This slide really shows the sources and utilization of funds for our State of Good Repair program. Starting with the sources of funds, we show our beginning balance of $85.7 million against a planned or budgeted value of $10 million. This is because we had spillover of funds from the prior fiscal year. We show realized sales tax revenue of $122 million against a budgeted amount of $119 million due to a strong economy and inflationary pressures. For federal and state funds, you may recall that we first pay for all the work performed out of pocket and then file for reimburses for eligible capital projects. Now, since a couple of our projects did not proceed at our planned pace through the second quarter of fiscal year 2025, we only realized federal and state revenues of $19.9 million against a planned value of $45.3 million. The other revenue bucket, which mainly comprises of interest revenue on our reserves, was realized at $1.3 million against a budgeted value of $1 million. Now, the usage section of this slide shows the State of Good Repair program segmented into the FDA asset categories. Overall, for the State of Good Repair program, we spent $146.7 million against a budgeted amount of $193.1 million. Now, this represents more than 75% of the planned budgeted expended through the second quarter of fiscal year 2025. For facilities and stations, we spent $37 million against a budgeted amount of $59.5 million. For maintenance of way, we spent $800,000 against a budgeted amount of $4.7 million. For the non-asset class, we spent $17.4 million against a budgeted amount of $34.7 million. For systems, we spent $20.7 million against a budgeted amount of $42.4 million, while for vehicles, we spent $70.8 million against a budgeted amount of 52 million. Next slide, please. This slide shows the performance of the top 10 projects in the State of Good Repair program. Now, starting with the procurement of the CQ400 rail car procurement project, I'm super pleased to inform you that the project is proceeding as planned. We will actually be showcasing the new rail car at the Lindbergh station, and a reception will be held at our Uptown atrium on January the 30th, beginning at 8 a.m. Now, from a financial perspective, you may recall that a change order of 57 million was issued to Stadler due to global externalities after our fiscal year 2025 budget was adopted in late March of 2024. At that time, we did not have visibility into the payment schedule of the change order. Now, committee members, you may recall that we paid 25 million of the change order amount in fiscal year 24, and we paid 25.7 million in the first quarter of fiscal year 2025. An additional 7 million for the change order will be paid, I believe, in Feb of 2025, bringing the total payment of the change order in fiscal year 2025 to a total of 32.7 million. On the rail station rehabilitation program, the program is proceeding really well, and we have work underway on several stations, including College Park, Airport Station, Indian Creek, and Five Points. Moving to the bus procurement project, we've ordered 37 CNG buses, and all of the bus deliveries are scheduled to occur between Feb through June of this year, Feb through June of 2025. Regarding the radio system upgrade program, again, the program is proceeding well, and we are on track to cut over to the new radio system in June of 2025. Regarding the electrical buses, we've ordered 6 60-foot EV buses. Of these, we have received 2, while the final 4 are due by the end of February 2025. We have also ordered 8 40-foot EV buses, and the delivery of these buses are supposed to start in February, and all the deliverables should be realized by the end of the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the sources and utilization of funds for the MARTA City of Atlanta program. Starting with the sources of funds, we show our beginning balance of 246.2 million against a planned or budgeted value of 243 million. We show realized sales tax revenue of 28.3 million against a budgeted amount of 27.6 million. We realized federal and state reimbursement revenue of 2.3 million against a budget of 27 million, because again, just like in the State of Good Repair program, a couple of our projects did not progress at our expected pace. Other revenue was realized at 6.1 million against a budgeted value of 2.5 million. The usage section of the slide shows that we spent 21.2 million against a budgeted amount of 68.4 million. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the performance of key projects in the MARTA City of Atlanta program. The MARTA Rapid Summerhill project has not progressed at our planned pace because we encountered several unforeseen site conditions. We encountered underground utilities that were hidden. We encountered a basement, a parking deck, and 2 sets of railroad tracks. We are working with the contractor to crash the schedule and bring the project back on schedule. Significant progress has still been made, but our vendors are also behind on billings, causing the actual expenditures to not fully reflect the work performed on behalf of the project. For the 5 Points transformation project, we continue coordination with the City of Atlanta for a move forward strategy. Deconstruction on the project has started and is in its first phase. On the MARTA Rapid Campbellton project, we are advancing the NEPA coordination with the FDA. From a financial perspective, again, our business partners are behind on invoicing us, causing the actual expenditures to not reflect the progress of work. On the Cleveland Avenue Metropolitan Parkway, which is an ART project, we are coordinating procurement for the construction contractor and estimate May PCP and June BOD to award the contract. On the financials, when the fiscal year budget was developed, again, March of 2024, we had expected to be in construction by the end of Q2 of fiscal year 2025. But we've had several factors, including additional scope being added to the project, and we had to start the bidding process again. And that's the reason our progress really fell behind the plan. On the Streetcar East extension, the LRT project, the City of Atlanta has requested a second round of studies consisting of turf track comparisons and vehicle analysis. These studies are expected to take about 3 months, and we will provide a revised project schedule once those studies have been completed. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the sources and utilization of funds for our More MARTA Clayton County program. Starting with the sources of funds, we show our beginning balance of $258.8 million against a planned value of $246.9 million. We show realized sales tax revenue of $17.3 million against a budgeted amount of $16.9 million. We realized federal and state reimbursement revenue of $1.6 million against a budget of $9.8 million. And that's primarily because one of our projects, the Clayton County O&M facility project, did not progress at the planned pace. Other revenue was realized at $6.5 million against a budgeted value of $5 million. The usage section of the slide shows that we spent $1.1 million against a budgeted amount of $16.4 million. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide shows the performance of some of the key projects within our More MARTA Clayton County program, starting with the MARTA Rapid South Lake project. The project is now in open procurement for final design. On the Clayton SR54 BRT project, we are finalizing the 30% design for the project. For the Clayton Bus Maintenance Facility, you may recall that the project consists of 2 funding sources, where 83% of the project costs are paid through core penny funds, while Clayton County's portion is the remaining 17%. Excited to share with you that the demolition phase of the project started in December after some delays, but is progressing well. And the project and the demolition phase is on track to be completed in Q2 of fiscal year 2026. The design of the build-out phase is also underway, and construction is expected to start in Q1 of calendar year 2026. On the Justice Center Transit Hub project, the final design is complete, and we will proceed with procuring the construction contractor. But again, on this project too, our vendors are behind on submitting their invoices, causing the actual expenditures that we see here to not truly reflect the work performed on the project. Next slide, please. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair Pond.
Thank you, Chaitan. Are there any questions for Greg or Chaitan?
Yeah, Al, this is Rod Frierson. I have a couple of questions for Greg.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not sure what slide we were talking about, the slide concerning the fare box collections. You said not recognizing the collection at the point of the fare box is a problem that's happening.
It's at the fare gates in the station, sir.
Okay, in the fare gates, correct. All right. And I'm sure operation is aware of the problem. Do you know if operation has done anything to to mediate what's happening in that with the collection?
To my understanding, at this point in time, it's only recently that the Office of Research and Analysis was able to confirm that there were, video evidence of people tapping in and that tap not being recorded in the back systems. So I know they're looking into it now. As for what they've done so far, I cannot speak to that. Don't know if I have any representatives online that can speak on behalf of that right now.
Kali, are you aware of?
See Rhonda there.
Rhonda, okay.
Good morning. And yes, that's more of a technical or a customer experience rather than operations necessarily. So it's under my purview. But yeah, we are working with our current vendor Cubic to understand why that transaction isn't making it all the way through. So there seems to be some sort of a break in the connection or the communication between the tap at the gate and our back end system that records that information, our data warehouse. So it's really, as Greg said, it's really us trying to figure out where the loss of information is, and so I'm taking responsibility for that with our not necessarily our IT, but Cubic's IT department and our data warehouse team. Yeah,
what I'm noticing when I'm on the system is that the places where we're doing construction, i.e. the Indian Creek and some other places, that the collection boxes, the gates are just not operating well. Some of them they're just not operating well. People are going through them, and because of frustration, I sit there and I watch them try to scan their QR codes. So there's some issues going on, and so I'm glad that you're aware of it.
Oh, yes. And not necessarily just related to, the areas where there is construction, but it's, because our gates are, the age of our gates, or they're so old and the components are so old, they're worn. That is part of a problem. If someone were to push through, sometimes they don't close back as quickly as we'd like. But that is going to be rectified as part of you've heard us talk about at our RAC meeting a couple of nights ago, the new AFC project. Sure. So we're getting new fair gates, and that will help to rectify that. But we're trying to keep on top of that as much as we can. With we've got a few mitigation factors that we're putting into play now that MARTA staff can help to close those when we see those open.
Okay. Yeah, that's critical. All right, thank you, Rhonda. Greg, my next question has to do with.
Go ahead, Rod.
I just got two more questions, Al. Has to do with the and maybe on your slide, Greg, slide 13. It had to do with the issue with federal funding being collected in a timely manner. I think it was stated that MARTA spends the money for the projects, and then we get reimbursed from the federal funding, and that deficit is pretty large. Is this something that's normal in this delay process of us being reimbursed for these expenses?
Well, just to be clear, it's not a delay from the federal government in reimbursing us. We have to spend the expenses first, then bill the feds, and then they reimburse us. Okay. And so in this situation, in most of these cases, is where a project delay has caused us to not perform the work to create the expenditure that is reimbursable by the feds. When we first budget for it, though, we budget our reimbursement based on when those projects are scheduled to proceed. So if there's a delay in that project schedule from when we first budget for it at the beginning of the year, we don't record the expenditure, therefore we cannot ask for reimbursement from the federal government.
Okay. So that shows a lack of spending on the project with those buckets.
Right, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay, and that helps me understand that process, but it's not trending in the best direction, which is some of the other numbers are not either, but that's another conversation. All right, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it. That's all I have, Al.
All right, we have two other questions. Mr. Zagabi first.
Thank you. Thank you for the update, Greg. Just 2 quarters into the year, when you look at the financials, particularly the operating ones, how are you feeling about how we're tracking? Like, I look at this and I see a $30 million, deficit to budget that already includes 11 million in carry forward. On top of that, there's 26 million that we got that's one time that we're not going to expect to see that type. So you start to layer those pieces, and just would love to hear halfway through the year, how do we feel about our current standing?
Well, I mean, I'll state my two largest concerns are pretty obvious based on the numbers, which are the third-party liability expenses, but those are largely unavoidable and unforecastable beyond our actuarial analysis. They're based on incidents that actually happen across the system. It's part of the reason why we make sure we have a healthy reserve, so if these things come up, we have a way of handling it. The other one, of course, is the overtime trend, and that one is a little trickier to handle because there are a number of factors that impact that. There's the there's the level of service we're trying to put out. There's the absenteeism that happens. There's the vacancies that happen. I'm sure everyone's been aware of how difficult it's been to retain operators once we hire them. They leave almost as quickly as we hire them, and sometimes they outpace it, and that ends up helping drive up that overtime because the existing workforce tries to stretch out to cover the service that we're trying to put out at a higher rate. So if you're asking how I feel about it, I mean, that's obviously a negative trend. We are accounting for it as we're building our budgets for the upcoming fiscal year. We're already having early discussions about how we should budget maybe on the higher end of risk on the casualty and liability going forward. And we're discussing if we need to come up with a different overtime plan as we go into the next fiscal year, as well as anything we can do to improve incentives for retention of operators that we hire. I hope that answers your question.
Greg, let me just
Sure.
add to that for Jacob's benefit and everyone else's, in recognizing the issues around third-party liability and seizing the moment that, with the governor saying that tort reform is, among his highest priorities, MARTA is absolutely pushing forward to find some recourse in that way, whether it's sovereign immunity or some kind of limitation on what we're expected to pay. We suspect that a little bit of success in that area will go a long way in these trends that Greg's just been talking about.
Okay, Jacob, anything else? Okay, Greg, I'll just make one point. Two issues with time and a half. One is absenteeism, but the other is vacancies. I think I could show you by math that you're not, with 40% benefits, you're not paying a large portion of those 40% benefits. So overtime isn't necessarily costing you $1.50 to the system, but that's a longer discussion. So some other time. Ms. Williamson?
Kind of going back to Mr. Frierson's commentary about the fare box, just curious, what percentage of our revenue does fares comprise?
Right now, it's around 12% of total revenue.
Okay, as a complement to other funding sources that we're getting, so it's 12%.
Yes, ma'am.
And how much were we down? Remind me on what we just saw here.
If we can actually go back to that slide, we can show you exactly the passenger revenues are down 3.7 million cumulative for the year.
All right, got it. All right, I was just curious and collecting some information. I'll circle back with you guys. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
any other questions for Greg or Chayton? Well, if not, we'll finish that piece. Are there any other matters to come before the committee? Well, if not, we'll adjourn this meeting and move on to planning and capital programs. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead and call to order our Planning Capital Programming Committee meeting. As a first item of business, I'll jump right into agenda item 1, approval of the November 21st, 2024 Planning Capital Programming Committee meeting minutes.
I move to approve. This is Hardage.
Worthy
Second.
second.
All right, let's call the vote.
James Durrett,
Approve.
Roderick Frierson,
Approved.
Rita Hardage,
Approve.
Jennifer Ive,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Approve.
Sagira Jones,
Approve.
Al Pond,
Approved.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Approve.
Jacob Zagabe,
Approved.
Valencia Williamson,
Approve.
Thomas Worthy.
Approved.
All right. Motion passes. We'll move on to item 2, resolution authorizing award of a contract for the procurement of disposal of land parcel D4138 surface area. We'll be bringing this forward by Ms. Boyd. I'll pass the mic over to you.
Good morning, Chairman Zagabe, Vice Chair Worthy, GM Greenwood, Chief Rocha, and members of the committee. If you could go to the next slide, please. This parcel in question is near the Garnett Station, 1 block north of the Garnett Station. It's at the corner of Trinity and Broad, and it's actually 1 block south of our future Summerhill BRT stop on Mitchell. And the parcel was acquired because the tunnel that leaves Garnett is built underneath. And for the last many years, it has lived as parking spaces and has been licensed to the adjacent parking lot owner, who also recently purchased the lot to the north along Mitchell Street from Fulton County, and also owns many, many properties in South Downtown. So after they acquired the Fulton County parking lot, requested if MARTA would be willing to sell our parcel so they can develop that area. And the next slide. So this is 3,279 square feet. It is excess property. It's no longer needed for the operation or maintenance of the system. And it is remnant property, as I said, that we acquired for construction of the tunnel. Currently, it is licensed to the adjacent owner for $9,441.12 per year. The appraised value in a fee sale is $258,135, and we received 1 bid for $401,000. Any sale would be deed restricted to retain our subsurface easement and access rights for noise and vibration and the other rights that we need. There is federal interest, so concurrence will be obtained before any closing. And if you could go to the next slide. So I'm here asking for a resolution authorizing award of a contract for the procurement of disposal of land parcel D4138-surface area, IFB number B50513. Thank you.
Thank you. Any movement on the motion?
Worthy moves.
Hardage second.
All right, any questions?
Yeah, got a question. So the bid went out for 283, I guess, and we actually got a bid for 400,000, right?
Correct.
So with them building on, it's only like 0.75 acres.
I think it was 0.075, or it's only 3,200 square feet.
Okay, so is there some adjacent property that you mentioned that they own?
Correct. They own the entire parking lot adjacent, and then they just purchased the parking lot to the north, and they would like to actually develop. Now, our parcel, because of the tunnel and it's shallow under there can't be any load bearing. That would be in the deed restriction.
Okay,
but it could still be used as, an entrance, a driveway. They could cantilever over it.
Okay, that's what I want to understand. The load bearing development on that space and how that would affect us deeding that over to them. Okay, all right, thank you. That's fine.
All right, any further questions? Perfect, thank you, Ms. Boyd. We'll call the vote.
James Durrett,
Approved.
Roger Frierson,
Approved.
Rita Hardage,
Approved.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Approved.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Approve.
Jacob Zagabe,
Approved.
Valencia Williamson. Valencia Williamson. Thomas Worthy.
Approve.
The motion is approved. Thank you. We will head to the next item of business. Thank you very much. Resolution authorizing a non-exclusive revocable license. And Ms. Boyd, the floor is yours.
Okay, it's a long title. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this is for a 60-month or less license agreement for a non-exclusive revocable license. Currently, there is a cell tower antenna, large antenna. It's on Statewood Road, adjacent to Georgia 400, and it's about 1.5 to 2 miles north of our Buckhead station. And if you could go to the next slide. The antenna has been there since 1999. Originally, it was under a longer-term lease, and then more recently under a license agreement. It's 3,780 square feet. The value of the license for the 5 years would be $699,574.01. And there is no federal interest there. Again, it would be a revocable license. So if we need that for transit at any time during the license agreement, we could have the land. And the next slide, please. So it's a resolution authorizing a non-exclusive revocable license agreement with NCWPCS MPL 27 Year Sites Tower Holdings in the amount of $699,574.01 for continued operation of the AT&T Statewood Cell Tower on MARTA parcel D7012Y, Fulton County, Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a motion on the resolution?
This is Hartage. I move to approve.
Durrett,
Hartage.
second.
Liva Durrett, seconding. Thank you. Any questions? No questions. I'll call the vote.
James Durrett,
Yes.
Roger Farnson,
Yes.
Frida Hartage,
Approve.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Yes.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Yes.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Jacob Zagabe,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson, Valencia Williamson, Thomas Worthy.
Yes.
All right. The motion carries. It is approved. We'll head back to the agenda. We have Ms. Boyd coming with a third as well here, non-exclusive revocable license with Crown Castle. Pass it to you.
Okay, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is at the Art Center station. It's just to the north of the station. And if you could go to the next slide. This antenna has been there since 1994. Again, it was under a longer term lease before this, and then to a shorter term license agreement. And it's 1,700 square feet for the licensed area. The value of the license for a 5-year, again, non-exclusive revocable license agreement is $404,190.41. And one of the other terms in this agreement just recognizes the fact that this could be a future site of a TOD. So that's just been added to the agreement, knowing that if that happens, that this would terminate. There is federal interest, so we will obtain concurrence. And I believe we've already obtained concurrence. And if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is a resolution authorizing a non-exclusive revocable license agreement with Crown Castle South LLC in the amount of $404,190.41 for continued operation of the Art Center Cell Tower, MARTA parcel D3079Y, Fulton County, Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion on the resolution?
Move approval, Jim.
Worthy seconds.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions? Seeing no questions, I'll call the vote.
James Durrett,
Yes.
Roger Farrison,
Yes.
Rita Hardage,
Approve.
Jennifer I,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Approve.
Al Pond,
Yes,
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Approved.
Jacob Zagabe,
Approved.
Valencia Williamson, Thomas Worthy.
Approved.
The motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Boyd. You were 3 for 3.
Thank you.
All right, we'll continue to move forward to item 5 on the agenda, resolution authorizing the award of a contract for professional consultant services for Clayton County, South Lake BRT Transit-Oriented Development Planning Study. We have Mr. Dowse who will be joining us. Mr. Dowse, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
That is correct. I get Dowse, Dose, Deweese, and a lot, so that's fine.
I've got a fun last name as well, so I try to respect.
Definitely. Good morning, Chair Gazabe, Vice Chair Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Chief Rocha, and the Planning and Capital Programs Committee members. As stated, I'm Sidney Dowse. I am the Policy Planning Director and also serving as the Interim Director of Transit-Oriented Development. I started with MARTA in September. Next slide. Today, I will take you through this resolution. I'll cover the background, scope of work, the status of the contract, and the selection committee recommendation. Next slide. Background, this is for a FTA-funded transit-oriented development study for the South Lake BRT corridor. The primary goal is to help advance transportation, economic development, land use, resilience planning for this area. The grant award total is about $1,200,000, as shown on the slide is the federal and local breakdown. The remaining balance, which I'll explain in the next slide, is about $900,000, and this grant will last until March of 2030. Next slide. Some background, and this will sort of tell you how we got here. This grant was actually awarded in 2021. Also in that year, prior work was started on the transit supportive land use study that was completed. That helped us get this grant from the FTA. The work on this grant started under the previous general planning contract with AECOM and VHB. Once that contract ended, we needed to do a new procurement. That procurement was approved by this committee in February of 2024, and Debbie Frank presented that at that time. Next slide. The scope of work. We had to primarily update the scope to reflect the amended LPA. As some of you know, the LPA for the South Lake BRT was moved from the terminus at College Park through Old National Highway and Godby Road and Roosevelt Highway to Riverdale Road, connecting at the airport station. Another major element is to continue the equitable development focus. begin and complete the corridor-wide stormwater and resilience strategy that has started. Also, complete corridor pilot studies. This is similar to complete streets, but for the corridor, we need to focus on the segments of the BRT that face pedestrian challenges, streetscape issues, and safety issues, primarily State Route 85 and the Terra Boulevard sections of the proposed alignment. Also, we will complete the specific small area plans for the proposed station areas. And in addition, with the alignment changing, some of the stations are changing also, and we will need to adjust for that. Next slide, please. The contract process, the RFP was solicited in August of 2024. The Source Evaluation Committee received 2 proposals in October. We met and completed the proposal scoring November the 15th of 2024. Next slide. And the SEC recommendation was a VHB contract value of $818,000, DBE goal of 25%. The DBE firms are listed. And in addition, the next steps, pending your approval, we will need to go before the Clayton County BOC to get their approval as well. And we will be coordinating with the BRT study as it moves towards final design, and also with the planning department as they complete their zoning code update, and that's the Clayton County Planning Department. Next slide. Therefore, I respectfully request your approval of the resolution authorizing the contract award for professional consulting services for Clayton County South Lake BRT Transit-Oriented Development Planning Study, RFP 504842 VHB. And I will also answer any questions. Thank you.
I move approval.
I'll second. Durrett.
Jacob, you there? We might have lost Jacob. Any questions?
No, I think we call the vote unless there's questions.
Yeah, Jacob's computer, he just texted me, his computer is frozen. He's coming back, but let's go ahead and call the vote. Ms. Huff?
Sorry, I was on mute. James Durrett,
Yes.
Roger Farson,
Yes.
Rita Hardage,
Yes.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Jacob Zagabe. Okay, Valencia Williamson,
Approved.
Thomas Worthy.
Approved.
Ms.
While we're
Huff,
waiting-
Segura Jones is a yes.
Okay,
While we're waiting on Jacob to come back, we'll continue on the agenda since it's so long. Agenda item number
Thank you.
6, Mr. Van Sickle.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Committee Chair Zagave, Vice Chair Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Ms. Rocha, and members of the Planning and Capital Programs Committee. On behalf of the Bus Network Redesign Project team, thanks for your time today. I'm Ryan Van Sickle, Director of Technical Services and Service Planning, and I'm here this morning to request approval for the solicitation of proposals for design build services to support the next-gen bus network redesigns supporting infrastructure. Next slide. So as you know, we're working on the next-gen bus network redesign, which will provide a well-connected, efficient bus network that, among other things, will improve our passenger experiences and generate higher ridership. The infrastructure that would be provided through this contract is intended to support the new bus network and is an important part of ensuring that that network can operate safely and efficiently when it's time to launch. The work for this contract would take place across the project study area consisting of Fulton County, DeKalb County, and the city of Atlanta. And we'll get into a little bit more detail with some examples in the following slides here. Next slide. To get into more details about the scope, the contract would provide improved bus bay capacity at 2 key stations, namely Avondale Station and Doraville Station. It would improve accessibility at 3 park and rides that we serve and that are important connecting points in the new network, namely the Barge Road Park and Ride, Mansell Road Park and Ride, and the Goldsmith Park and Ride. It would allow us to improve intersection geometry at 15 locations, which would allow our buses to make safer and more efficient turns. And it would allow us to improve pedestrian accessibility and safety at 130 sites through a variety of pedestrian improvements, including filling sidewalk gaps, installing ADA ramps and tactile surfaces, and as well as adding crosswalks and crossing infrastructure. Next slide. Here we have 2 examples of work that would be needed at the park and rides and that this contract would provide. On the left, you can see the Barge Road Park and Ride, which has missing or non-compliant ADA ramps, as well as damage to the sidewalk and the curbing, which makes for a difficult and non-accessible pedestrian experience. Our project manager had a picture is worth 1,000 words moment during her field visit to the Barge Road Park and Ride, captured here in the photo. You can see a senior citizen who is using a walker to get to the bus stop, and he's actually chosen to walk up the bus driveway rather than to use the deteriorated pedestrian walkway to his left. At the right, you can see the Mansell Road Park and Ride, which lacks pedestrian connections from the actual park and ride lot and the stops in it out to Mansell Road and its sidewalks. You can see here in this photo a well-worn pedestrian trail that connects from that sidewalk and a signalized crossing to a gap in the fence where passengers are clearly using it, but it's not a safe, accessible pathway. Next slide. To walk through a couple more examples of other types of work that this contract would address. On the left, you can see a bus stop, this one located on Cascade Road and Linway Lane in Southwest Atlanta. At this bus stop, we do have a shelter and a paved connection to the street, but you see that there are no sidewalks and no connection to the nearby intersection. There's also no crosswalk, and the connection from the bus stop to the curb is missing its ADA compliant tactile surface. Correcting these issues would help improve passenger safety, pedestrian conditions, and the overall riding experience. At the right, we can see the intersection of McWilliams Road and Jonesboro Road, which is also State Route 54, located in Southeast Atlanta. And this is one of the locations that we've identified a need for intersection geometry improvements here. In the current and the proposed network, buses travel down McWilliams Road heading left to right, heading east, and then they take a right turn to go southbound on Jonesboro Road. You can see noted here in the photo, Jonesboro Road is home to 2 very narrow, very short left turn lanes with maybe just a few vehicles capacity. They're actually also extremely narrow, about 7 feet wide. They don't really do a lot to help improve capacity at that intersection, and they constrain our bus turn. And so through this contract, we would be able to work and redesign this intersection to provide a clearer, safer passage for our buses making those turns. In all of these instances, we would be coordinating and working together to partner with local governments and transportation agencies such as GDOT and ATL-DOT. Next slide. To provide a little bit more information about the solicitation, we're specifically looking for a design build vendor for the construction of these sites. The proposed design build vendor would require specific expertise in project management, architectural and engineering design services, safety certification support services, and of course, full construction services. And we will be working with diversity and inclusion, our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, to ensure that DBE goals are set and met with this contract. Next slide. And then to walk through the timeline for this procurement quickly, we're in the solicitation, or working to start the solicitation phase now. So we've been preparing the RFP documents and have come to you today to start the process for approval to solicit. If approved, then we would be working with a source evaluation committee to receive and evaluate those proposals. In the coming months, there are a couple of additional infrastructure items of a much more specialized nature. And so we do plan to come back to you with some additional procurement options for those as well, getting a little bit more into specifics on technical aspects of the infrastructure. With the approval to, or with the source evaluation committee completed, then we would come back to you to ask approval to award the solicitation to a vendor. And we do anticipate doing that at about the same time that we come back for your approval of the final redesign network around the turn of the fiscal year. And then, of course, with approval of the award, then we would be looking to get started with the design and construction work right away to take place in summer and fall leading up to the launch of the draft network, or the bus network, my apologies. Next slide. And with that, I conclude the presentation here, requesting your approval of the resolution authorizing solicitation of proposals for these design build services to support the next gen bus network redesign's infrastructure efforts. Thank you, and happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sickle. Am I back in action? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. I'm gonna just take us to motions first, and then we'll call the questions.
Upon moves for approval.
Durrett, second.
Second. Any questions? I see Ms. Hyde has her hand up. Sure. Pass it to you.
Yes, and I think this is a really, I think I know the answer to this, but for the listening public, the fact that we are doing this RFP right now, we're doing this in parallel with continuing the public input process on the bus design network, correct? So I don't want anybody to get the idea that, oh, we're moving into a contract phase when there are, still meetings on the calendar. So if you'll just address that, and hopefully that is the answer, that these two are parallel processes and we're still taking input on the redesign itself.
Absolutely, Chair. I, yes, can absolutely confirm that this is a parallel effort to our public engagement effort. And so we are very much still taking feedback on the network itself. And that is a separate process that will be ultimately reflected in the work done here.
All right, thank you.
Certainly.
This is Ms. Scott. Thanks for verifying that information. As I know, we have next gen meetings scheduled in DeKalb County as well. So that was part of my concern as well. Thank you.
Yes, a couple of questions. So with this particular proposal, I'm wondering how far is going to go in terms of the design and rebuild of the BARB station or the other locations. So I guess my question is, are they going to do the design and build of the actual structures that's at the station, or the landscaping or topography of the station, or all those other things that we would normally do as part of our station rehabilitation piece? Is this part of what they're going to take over responsibility in with this proposal?
Yeah, certainly, and thanks for that question. So Barge Road in particular, and Mansell has a similar condition. There are agreements around those with some different roles and responsibilities between GDOT and the City of Atlanta at Barge. And so we're really working to partner with them to try and make sure that as many improvements as possible are made. MARTA wants to focus first on the ones that are, access to the Barge Road and making sure that people can get to that canopy safely and in an ADA compliant way. But we'll also be working with the city and GDOT, who have some other maintenance responsibilities for the structure, for the lighting, and some of the paving.
Okay, great. And I know that when I took the bus route that took me to Barge Road, because I wanted to just really see what our customers were experiencing on Camilton Road, and I had a conversation with the bus driver, this FYI, and some of the issues they were having was at night. Because there wasn't enough lighting in that space. There was some issues going on with just not clear vision because of all the overgrown piece. So I'm hoping that that station will get a complete design in a way that will make that community shine, because it's really adjacent to what's happening at Greenbrier Mall. And you're right. And I think the buses are going to have to be, there's got to be a lot of design, allow those buses to make those turns that need to be made. Actually, if you just ride the bus, you'll see what they're faced with. At least I have. So I'm hoping that's all a part of the scope of redesigning this particular routing corridor. All right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Frierson, for those comments, especially about the lighting and landscaping. We're working with GDOT, ATL, DOT, and of course also the longer term other projects that MARTA has that affect Barge Road, like the Campbellton BRT. So we'll I appreciate those comments.
All right, thank you. All right.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll just say, Mr. Van Sickle, thank you. This is super important. We made major investments in the rider experience at each of our stops. And as we pursue a next generation network, I think this is super important to the rider experience. So very happy to see that the team is moving this in parallel so that we can move quickly once we get to the next phase and ensure that we have a great rider experience. With that, I will move us to the vote.
Can't hear you, Jacob.
I'm saying with that, I will call the vote. Can you hear me?
Okay. Okay. James Durrett,
Enthusiastic, yes.
Roderick Frierson,
Yes.
Rita Hardage,
Yes.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Yes.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Yes.
Rita Scott,
Yes, and based on the pictures we saw, please hurry.
Jacob Zagabe,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson,
Yes.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The motion passes. All right, I will move us to our 7th agenda item. And after this agenda item, I will be passing it to Vice Chair Worthy to lead the remainder of the meeting. So this agenda item is resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement program management consultant services for Georgia 400 BRT. Mr. Prescott, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Chair Zakabi, Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Ms. Rocha, and committee members. As stated, we're requesting a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of program management consultant services for the Georgia 400 BRT project RFP P50661. Next slide, please. So the Georgia 400 Express Lane and Bus Rapid Transit project has been around for some time, and now we're moving into the next phase with our GDOT partner. The BRT component of the project has been integrated with GDOT's Express Lane project. The BRT service will be running from the North Springs station to the Windward Parkway within the Express Lane provided by GDOT. We have inline stations planned at Holcomb Bridge Road and North Point Mall with a potential station at Old Milton Parkway. GDOT has selected their design build vendor for this project and plans to finalize their contract with them later this year. Next slide, please. So in order to support the transit side of the Fast Track Design Build Vendors program, MARTA is seeking procurement of an architectural engineering consultant to provide program management consultant services. As MARTA's representatives, these services are to ensure contract compliance and oversight for the transit design and implementation components. The service will also include support for the MARTA system activation and operational readiness relative to the integration of MARTA provided systems, support systems, fare service, and BRT vehicles. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion will provide a DBE goal during the solicitation process. Next slide, please. Therefore, we'd like to request approval of a resolution authorizing a resolution of proposals for procurement of program management consultant services for the Georgia 400 BRT RFP 50661. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion on the resolution?
Move
Move
approval.
approval.
I second. Frierson second.
Perfect, thank you. It has been moved and seconded. We'll go to questions. Mr. Bond.
Larry, the state put $100 million in to basically include the foundation work, utility work, and the right-of-way acquisition for this phase. There's no funding for the rest of this. So will there be a lot of work for these program managers to do in this until the second piece is funded? Because GDOT's responsible for all of that work. I'm just asking the question for a little more clarity.
Yes, sir. The $100 million is the base program right now for BRT within the express lanes. The design build vendor has also provided another $26 million on top of that as part of the transit incentives of their contract. So the PMC will help us make sure that we are in contract compliance, that we're not holding them up in any way because they are a design build vendor. We're working for GDOT. As that program develops, there are other opportunities that we're working with GDOT in expanding the additional services to complete not only the current project, but also looking at possibilities of including the Old Milton Parkway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farris.
Yeah, so I guess that's really where I was going with when it came to what Alpine was talking about, and that's the funding piece, because this right here addresses the platform that's the center platform, but then we have to deal with the bridge that's going to run from the platform over the highway or expressway to where the stations are. And then the stations are a part of what needs to be designed and built at these locations. So those are all kind of a different components of this. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Our current consultant is finalizing advanced 30% designs for the stations to be provided to that design builder to expand it going forward. Again, cooperation with GDOT and funding opportunities that we're exploring right now.
Okay, and the picture that you have right there is exactly what I was speaking to. That's on the slide. That's how it would look, and then there's parts of it that need to be funded, but that's where we're going. All right, thank you, thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Mr. Pond, is he still have your hand up? I don't know if that's hanging over. All right. If no further questions, we'll call the vote.
James Durrett,
Yes.
Project Farson,
Yes.
Frida Hardage,
Yes.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Shakira Jones,
Yes.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Yes.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Jacob Zagabe,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson,
Yes.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes.
Resolution passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I'll pass it to Vice Chair Worthy to carry us forward.
Thank you, Chair Zagabe. We'll move to resolution number 8, or agenda item number 8, a resolution authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of communications-based train control project management consultant support services, and that will be presented by Melda Hickman.
Hello, good morning, Chair Zagabe. Good morning, Chair Worthy. Good morning, Mr. Greenwood, Chief Rocha, and committee members. My name is Melda Hickman. I'm Director of Systems Engineering. I'm here to present a resolution authorizing solicitation of proposal for procurement of program management consulting services for CBTC, for communication-based train control, RFP P50662. Next slide, please. The MARTA board recently authorized the selection of the communication-based train control DB vendor. This program will replace our aging train control system with next generation improvements. Next slide, please. CBTC is a specialized system that has been developed internationally, which is emerging at national transit agencies. Therefore, subject matter experts are limited. Our purpose today is to procure technical program management consultant services for these support functions in order to ensure contract compliance with the CBTC DB vendor as MARTA's representative throughout the design, development, and implementation. Next slide, please. This contract is proposed for 8 years, again, to parallel the varying stages of the CBTC DB vendor program. Funding will be supported by the fiscal year annual budget, capital budget. We are looking for the subject matter experts of the world who can leverage technical expertise and specialized experience to ensure a successful implementation of the CBTC program. The Office of Diversity and Inclusion will review the industry and provide a participation goal during the solicitation process. Next slide, please. I respectfully request your approval authorizing the solicitation of proposals for the procurement of program management consultant services for CBT for communication-based training control, RFP P50662. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hickman. Do I have a motion?
I move. This is Hardage.
Second, Williamson.
Ms. Williamson seconds. Any questions? Hearing none, Ms. Huff, please call the vote.
Roderick Frierson,
Yes.
Rita Hardage,
Yes.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Yes.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Yes.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson,
Yes.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes. The motion, the resolution passes. Thank you, Ms. Hickman. Agenda
Thank
item 9 is a briefing on DeKalb ART to BRT feasibility study results. Andrew Pofall, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vice Chair Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Ms. Rocha, and members of the committee. My name is Andrew Pofall. I am a project manager in the Department of Planning and Project Development, and I am excited to be able to present the results of our DeKalb ART to BRT feasibility study to you all this morning. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on the feasibility study before we get to the actual results. The study effort began in July of 2024 at the request of our partners in DeKalb County. And what this study is seeking to do is analyze the feasibility of BRT along 3 corridors: Buford Highway, Candler Road, and Memorial Drive. The committee will recall that Buford Highway and Candler Road currently have active arterial rapid transit ART projects that are fully funded to completion currently. Memorial Drive is a corridor that we don't have any active capital projects on, so we were kind of looking at both arterial rapid transit and bus rapid transit along Memorial. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're really going to focus primarily on Buford Highway and Candler Road, given the fact that we already have projects ongoing in those corridors. Next slide, please. So very quickly, a little bit of an overview of our study process. We started off with an existing conditions analysis where we looked at demographics, transportation characteristics in the 3 corridors. We also took a look at MARTA's own ART, BRT guidelines, and we also had the opportunity to interview a couple of peer agencies in San Francisco and LA who have done similar conversion-esque projects from an ART to BRT. From there, we started our development of alternatives, and really what this means is for this feasibility study, distinguishing what we were going to assume for ART and what we were going to assume for BRT, and we'll touch on that in the next slide a little bit more. From there, once we distinguished those components, we evaluated our impacts of going from ART to BRT. Impacts being how much is it going to cost us in terms of capital dollars, operating dollars, and schedule impacts. But we also, tried to estimate and understand the benefits through service attraction, vulnerable communities, and safety, which I'll touch on all of those things in Buford Highway and Candler specifically. The last step is we're working on a final report to document all of our findings along with an executive summary that will be a smaller document. So if we jump to the next slide, very quickly, I want to touch on some of the elements that differentiate arterial rapid transit and bus rapid transit. We kind of have these 6 areas. The first up at the top and probably the most visible are the dedicated lanes. Arterial rapid transit tends to operate in mixed traffic versus bus rapid transit is operating in dedicated lanes. And this is a key conversion element because we go from these projects being primarily focused on a stop location to then being focused on much larger of the corridor. We're looking at the entire roadway when we're talking about dedicated lanes. This feeds into the second element, additional supportive infrastructure, when we're looking at the entire corridor and not just particularly around our stop locations. That means we're looking at drainage, we're looking at sidewalks, we're looking at other things that impact our project. The next is around the stations and the stops themselves. ART stops, the footprints that we have for those are much smaller than our station footprints for BRT. So those footprints get larger. It takes up more space to put in a BRT station than it does an ART stop. And additionally, around the stops and stations for our ART projects, we tend to be closer together, so about 1/3 of a mile. Whereas with BRT, we want to try and be closer to 1/2 a mile. It's very context sensitive depending on the corridor. But those are typical spacing. That's something that we would have to consider in conversion. Next is the fleet. So the 2 ART projects on Buford and Candler right now, the analysis that we've done is that we would be able to absorb the vehicles that we need through the existing fleet, through the restructuring of our service. If we shifted to BRT, we would need to go out and actually purchase new vehicles. So that's a pretty large cost. And then lastly is NEPA and the RTCAA, just policy implications. If we shift to BRT, there's going to be impacts around environmental analysis and impacts around what our agreement with our jurisdictional partners are. Now, the next couple of slides, we're going to kind of go through some report card-esque summaries for each corridor. But before we do that, I want to specifically touch on safety benefits. If we can jump to the next slide. As you recall, that's one of those kind of benefit areas that we looked at through this study. But with safety benefits, I can't come and tell you that, oh, if we go from ART on Buford Highway to BRT, we're going to see a reduction in crashes of 29% at this stage. Safety is very, very design specific. So what we've done instead is kind of done a little bit of a comparison of the benefits that we would expect to see generally, both with ART and BRT, and then what we would additionally see with BRT. So from a safety benefit perspective, what we're getting with the existing projects on the ART, and if we did a BRT, is improved ADA accessibility, improved access to our stops. We're also going to see improved safety improvements at those stops themselves, along with better lighting at those stops and stations and kind of along the corridor. And then lastly, the last one that was kind of shared between the two is improved pedestrian crossings. We're trying to make sure that our folks in the ART projects are going to be able to get across the street safely between the stops. And that's where you start to see the differentiation between ART and BRT. And this comes back to what I said earlier. When you with a BRT project, you're touching much more of a corridor. You're looking at the entire roadway, and you're separating modes. So buses are separated from car traffic, that are separated from pedestrians. That's safer for everybody. Reduces bus to car collisions, bus to pedestrian collisions, all sorts of things like that we would expect to see. And then additionally, through a project, we'd be able to put in other safety countermeasures to further increase safety in the corridors. So that's the safety benefit. Let's pivot to talking about the corridors themselves. If we jump to the next slide. First, we're going to talk about Buford Highway. Buford is approximately 8.5 miles in length. It's from Doraville Station to Lindbergh Center Station. The ART, the corridor, the project itself connects to the future Clifton Corridor Phase 1 at Lindbergh. Buford Highway is currently served by the 39. This is the highest ridership route in the current MARTA system. We pass through 4 municipalities: Atlanta, Brookhaven, Chamblee, and Doraville. We also touch 2 counties, Fulton County and DeKalb and Ness. So if we jump to the next slide, we have our kind of report card or summary of the results for Buford Highway. If we start in the top left, what you'll see are some key demographic characteristics of this corridor. Percentages of popular households without a vehicle, low-income households, and renter-occupied households. And what I'll just say here is that these percentages are higher along Buford Highway when we compare that to the rest and the entirety of DeKalb County. Next, if you move down to the bottom left, we've got what we're calling service attraction. And what this means is, for a feasibility scope like this, we don't have the ability to go out and do a full-blown ridership model that'll give us a very exact number on how many people we would expect to be using this. But we do have techniques, some analysis that we can do to kind of try and estimate, how many folks do we think potentially could ride this. Is very rough, keywords being rough and potential and might. I don't want us to get stuck on this is exactly what we would see. But what I want to point out is that Buford Highway is the highest ridership route in the system. The baseline is very, very strong. Nearly 5,000 people a day are taking it. Through that analysis, when we switch to ART, we see a percentage improvement of about 7% and then about 20% if we went up to BRT. So it's kind of what we're looking at from a service attraction perspective. Then on the right side of the slide, you are going to see our costs. So capital cost for our ART is somewhere between 25 and 50 million. That jumps up if we are going to go to BRT through this feasibility study between 200 and 300 million. Annual operating costs would also go up because with BRT we turn the service level up just a bit more. So that's what it looks like from a monetary cost perspective. From a schedule perspective, the ART, we're looking at about another 4 years to complete. Both projects have completed the 30% design and we're in the process of procuring final design. If we switch to ART or switch to BRT today, and we had the money to do it right now, which is a kind of a key hurdle I'll talk about in a second, it would be 8 years for us to be able to complete it, is what we were kind of seeing through this study. So that is the Buford Highway summary. If we jump to the next slide, I'll talk very quickly about Candler Road. Candler is about 8 miles in length. It runs from the Avondale station to the GSU Decatur campus off of Panthersville Road. Again, connects to the Clifton Corridor, the phase 2 of the project at Avondale. This corridor is primarily served by Route 15 today, which is the 5th highest ridership route in DeKalb County. Most of the corridor is in unincorporated DeKalb. We have a little bit of a segment that dips into the city of Atlanta right at the corner of Memorial and Candler Road, and then a little bit that dips into the city of Decatur up close to Avondale. Before I jump to the next slide, I want to highlight and remember Buford Highway is the highest ridership route in the system. Candler Road is also a high performer. It's the 5th highest ridership route in the system. So if we jump to the next slide, you'll see kind of why I'm saying that is because that service attraction down at the bottom left, the baseline is a lot smaller. But I just want to continue to highlight that that baseline number is still very strong for our system. It's still very strong for DeKalb County. The other thing I want to point out about service attraction is the growth potential, as it seems a little bit less on the ART and a little bit more on the BRT. Part of that comes from the way that we were doing this analysis. Like I said, we couldn't do a full ridership model. We're kind of doing this rough analysis. And because the 15 doesn't exactly match that alignment today, we get a little bit more noise and that calculation that we're doing. Now, if I direct you up to the top left, from a demographics perspective, very similar to the Buford Highway corridor, very similar percentages. We have a little bit less in the renter-occupied households, but still higher than what we see across all of DeKalb County. Next, bringing you back over to the costs, similar to Buford, but actually a little bit more expensive. We think in terms of the capital cost, this is because part of the study we went through and tried to look at, how what does capacity look like on the corridors today? How much more laneage would we actually physically have to build versus how much laneage do we think we potentially convert? Buford is 6, 7, 8 lanes wide in places, so there's a lot more opportunity for lane conversion versus Candler Road tends to be a lot more constrained. Most of the time we're seeing a 4 or 5 lane cross section with buildings being built up much closer to the edge of the right of way, which we essentially saw that and said, okay, it's going to cost us more to operate or build in this corridor. Then lastly, I'll just point out the schedule again, very similar. Both ART projects are kind of on the same timeline. The BRT, we kind of expect, again, if we had funding available immediately, it would take us 8 years to be able to get to completion. So those are the summary slides. If we jump to the next slide, I'll kind of got some key takeaways here that One of the big things is that, again, Buford Highway is the highest ridership, kind of what I mentioned on the last side. It has that highest potential for lane conversion, and it does have a higher concentration of our vulnerable populations. That puts it as the highest candidate for being converted to BRT. Secondly, with Candler, we really see with that kind of that baseline that we have, it's lower than Buford Highway. The expense is a little bit higher. It's more challenging for lane conversion, but it still serves really key population as a key corridor for our existing service. That we feel that the LPA of ART is really still appropriate at this time. Then on Memorial, I know I didn't talk about that in a lot of detail. That's partially because we haven't really had, this is the first time we've touched that corridor in a very long time. We really think that we need some more analysis and coordination on that level to really determine, what the path forward potentially could look like on Memorial. And then lastly, and I kind of alluded to this a couple of times, despite the fact that we think that Buford is a good candidate for shifting to BRT, there are several hurdles that exist in being able to do that. If we jump to the next slide, I can talk through those. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay. The first of those hurdles and the largest of those hurdles is being funding. Right now, we have the funding to do the arterial rapid transit projects, the ART projects. There is a big funding gap to be able to do BRT on Buford or Candler or Memorial. Buford, it's around $250–300 million funding gap. The next hurdle that exists is that traffic lane conversion potential. So we made assumptions in this study around how much we can convert, and that's really a driver on the cost. We would have to really nail down and work with our partners at GDOT to lay down what that conversion would actually look like, and making sure that they're comfortable with the things that we're doing, because ultimately Candler and Buford are both state routes. So it's GDOT roadways, so we'd have to work a lot with them. And then our last hurdle to being able to convert is customer expectations. So we've been communicating that we're doing these ART projects along these corridors for a while now. Moving to BRT was ultimately going to push out that project schedule and really delay when our customers and our constituents are going to see benefits in these corridors. So we have to be able to manage that customer expectation. And if we jump to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about the roles that MARTA and our partners really play in advancing and addressing those hurdles that exist. MARTA, primarily, our biggest thing is that we really evaluate transportation infrastructure and our operating investments, short, medium, long term. That's what this study is starting to do. We can help our partners understand what good investments are going to look like. We can also play a very key role in that we are the ones who pursue federal funding to be able to build these projects. And so to do that, both getting infrastructure built and pursuing funding, communication of those needs to our partners in our municipalities is really important. Whether that's funding, supportive land use that helps us go after more funding, things like that. Additionally, Sydney presented to you all earlier about a transit-oriented development study that we're doing. We can also do some of that type of work. For DeKalb and for our municipalities, the things that their roles here are helping us access local funding to help close that funding gap and access federal funding. The municipalities particularly, they really have a lot of control over zoning and land use planning and implementation. So we can do a great TOD study, but it really takes our partners to actually implement those land use changes, those zoning recommendations through those studies. And then also they can play a role in helping incentivize our private partners on the development side to actually want to come in and build the things that are in that zoning. Just because we say that you can build a 3-story building doesn't mean it's going to pencil out for our partners on the private side. And then lastly, supportive infrastructure. We are touching like pedestrian infrastructure and some of our projects, but broadly, that's something that really the municipalities in DeKalb can help us out on. And then lastly, kind of all of these things are a partnership, but really to touch on that last hurdle of customer expectations is making sure that MARTA and DeKalb and municipalities, we kind of have a unified approach in speaking with the community and managing those expectations and communicating why we're making a decision and why we're choosing to do things so that, the community can still be bought in on what we're doing. And then if we go to the last slide, kind of the next steps that we're working through right now is developing that final report document and an executive summary. We are here today reporting out to the Planning and Capital Programs Committee on the results, and then we are going to our partners at DeKalb at their Public Works and Infrastructure Committee meeting on the 18th to present these results as well. And that is all I have for my presentation. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of committee members?
Yes, I have a.
Go ahead.
I think-
Go ahead, Ms. Scott.
Go ahead, Karen. I believe your hand was up first.
Thank you. First, I have two questions. Why is there such a long timeline for BRT? And the second question is, can the ART be converted to BRT at a future date? So if we decided, if there was a construction for ART after construction was completed, can that be converted to BRT at a later time?
So to answer your first questions on the additional timeline, I mentioned this during the presentation that a huge difference between ART and BRT is that ART is really, we're looking at our specific stop locations. That's most of where we're doing our survey. That's where we're doing our design. Versus BRT, we have to touch the entire corridor. We're analyzing the entire roadway. We're doing a full roadway design. We're doing a full traffic analysis. And so that adds significant amount of time to the schedule. That's one element of it. The second element of it is the environmental analysis that's required. Right now, Candler and Beaufort are both progressing with local funds. And so the requirements surrounding NEPA and environmental analysis are much lower. We've essentially assumed in this study that we would need federal money, and that federal money would come with having to do more environmental assessment. Before I answer the second question, does that cover it for you?
Yes, thank you for the additional clarification.
Yeah, of course. And then in terms of the conversion, there are elements. If we progress with the ARTs and we complete those, there are elements, the station footprints. One of the things that we would do with a BRT is analyze that station spacing and see if we would continue to use the exact same spots that we would build the ART stations. And there would definitely be instances where we would be able to use that kind of same station placement and build up. Again, like I said, the stations for BRT are larger than ART, so we would have to come back to those locations and expand those footprints and build more infrastructure. But we would be able to utilize at least some of those stop locations from the ART.
Andrew, is it also fair to say that there would be, and I think you alluded to this, there'd be some concession in terms of the spacing where BRT is about a half a mile between stops, right, but ART is about a third of a mile or so between stops. So you would either be entertaining sunk costs by getting rid of some of the ART stations, or you would have a less than optimal BRT spacing.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. Thank you, Polly. That's good to know.
Yes. A couple of questions. You mentioned the partners in DeKalb. Who are the partners in DeKalb other than the commissioners?
Yeah, so I think we've got our partners at the Board of Commission, but we also are making sure that at the staff level, that long-range planning is aware of what we're kind of working on. We've communicated with them. We've communicated with Public Works, Roads and Drainage, to make sure that they are also aware and abreast of the study that we're ongoing with, and ultimately they move it the direction of their board. And so making sure that they're kind of aware of those conversations that are going on.
And the reason I'm asking is also because you mentioned there were no major projects on Memorial Drive. And there is a major project that may be considered Covington Highway, where it intersects with Memorial Drive because it's maybe facing Covington Highway, but it extends to Memorial Drive. And there is a project in working with the department, the DeKalb County Housing Authority. So though it may not face Memorial Drive, it definitely affects Memorial Drive.
Yes, definitely. And what I mean that there aren't any major projects is that we don't have any major corridor studies along the entire length of Memorial Drive up until this point. We're definitely with some of the other corridor studies that we have going on. We're definitely paying attention to what's going on Memorial, and I hear you about that development that definitely has a large impact on Memorial Drive.
Right, it has a very large impact. There's lots of construction going on and projects. Memorial Drive itself. So I wanted to make sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Any other questions? Well, thank
Yes,
you.
I have a question, Thomas.
Go ahead, Mr. Frierson.
Okay, just to one, you mentioned new buses would be required for the BRT routes. And I'm assuming that's because the stations are going to be elevated. Is that is the biggest issue, just that the buses are going to may not fit the size of the stations? And I know there might be some appearance issues also in terms of some things that we're doing with it, but is that something that has to happen if we have this BRT in place, or is that transitional?
Yeah, so I think that is a primary issue with just trying to use the existing fleet. Is one of the key characteristics of BRT is having that level boarding. And that's not something that our existing fleet's able to do. And so making sure that we have the ability to do that level boarding is pretty critical. And then and Kali or Carrie, jump in here if I speak incorrectly. And another thing that we're doing with the rapid program at Southlake and on Campbellton and on Summerhill is all of those buses are going to be interchangeable. They're all going to be operating, as a singular unit, so we can move a bus from Southlake to Summerhill if we need to, or Summerhill to Campbellton. So we would want to be able to continue to do that. We don't want to isolate any of these rapid projects.
That's correct, Andrew. We are really focused on the brand for BRT, so that those buses are interchangeable. Again, the level boarding, but really it's all about maintaining that MARTA Rapid brand.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And my last question has to do with the local funding piece that needs to be done. So just help me understand it. My colleague might be able to help me on this one. So if DeKalb County puts in a local funding piece, whereas value added taxes or special service district, and that is in place, but the revenue has not been generated yet in these spaces that they decided to support transit, does that still count for local funding, or do we have to come back with some numbers, real numbers that says, hey, this is what we're actually collecting?
Yeah, I think it's a combination there, Mr. Frierson, and we would have to get our finance folks to weigh in. But in terms of local funding, we need ready cash. And then in terms of long-term funding strategy, the VAT would be a nice part of that.
Okay. All right. That sounds fair. Thank you.
Any other questions? Here, the last item on the agenda is the briefing on Streetcar East preliminary study updates. Abby Gusty.
Yeah. So good morning, Vice Chair Worthy, Mr. Oh, can you hear me? Yep. Okay, good deal.
Yes,
right.
We can hear you.
All right. So good morning, Vice Chair Worthy, Mr. Greenwood, Ms. Rocha, and members of the committee. My name's AJ Joshi. I'm the director of the Expansion Program Management Office, and today I will be briefing this committee on the Atlanta Streetcar East Extension Project preliminary studies. Next slide, please. So this project is part of the MARTA Atlanta program, or the Atlanta MARTA program, and will add a 2-mile extension to MARTA's streetcar network to bring, ultimate goal is to bring network neighborhoods closer together, support local businesses, and make public transit an appealing option for residents, students, and visitors alike. The Atlanta streetcar will provide critical infrastructure that reduces car dependence, supports walkable neighborhoods, and enhances access to some of Atlanta's cultural and economic hubs. Next slide, please. So at a previous committee meeting, MARTA's board tasked us with conducting 3 preliminary studies prior to us moving forward with developing the final design. The first task was to evaluate the existing streetcar system and look for opportunities to enhance it with the core goals of improving safety, customer experience, and operations. The second task was to reevaluate our fleet needs and look at the feasibility of utilizing hybrid vehicles, and I'll go into what that is on the next slide. This allows for both on-wire and off-wire electric propulsion technologies. And in addition, we looked at options for replacing or reselling the existing fleet. Third task was to determine if it was feasible to embed turf track along the rail segment located within the Beltline alignment. This was a recommendation by Atlanta Beltline Inc. in order to comply with their design and environmental goals. And finally, MARTA's design consultant is HDR. They've conducted these studies and they provided us some insights and recommendations, which we've included in reports that we shared with the committee. They also took a look at public engagement strategy, which was also part of the analyses that we did here. Next slide, please. So just to kind of go over some of our key findings and recommendations, HDR provided a comprehensive report. Again, we provided that to the committee members. And with regards to the existing system enhancement, there were 48 infrastructure and operational improvements listed that focused on 3 core areas: safety-focused improvements, customer experience improvements, and improvements in operations through jurisdictional partnerships with the city and others. And I'll go into detail on that on the next slide. MARTA also recommended the use of hybrid vehicles. And what this is, a hybrid streetcar vehicle is one that's able to electrically power itself from an overhead catenary system. This is what you would see if you go out to the Atlanta streetcar today on the existing alignment. And then it would convert to using stored power provided by onboard batteries in what would be a catenary free zone. We right now anticipate this will go through the historic Auburn neighborhood and along the Beltline alignment. And the third recommendation was with regards to turf track. And so what we selected was a concrete embedded track, which is shown in that picture on the right-hand side. This allows MARTA to continue to utilize our existing inspection standard operating procedures, and it kind of future-proofs us to be able to utilize autonomous inspection technologies. We felt that this was the best recommendation that can combine both aesthetics and safety. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we basically reached out to our key partners, which is the Atlanta Beltline and the City of Atlanta, to seek consensus. And we presented the existing system enhancements to all of the partners, and everybody generally agreed that this would improve the existing system. But it's important to note that several of the recommendations will require letter of agreements, memorandums of understanding with our jurisdictional partners. This would include the Atlanta Police Department, the ATL DOT, Georgia DOT, our utility partners, and others if we're to implement some of these recommendations. And provide a couple examples. The streetcar's on-time performance is frequently impacted by illegal curbside parking, impacts by utility companies doing their work along the alignment, and other non-planned events. So one of our recommendations is to have better real-time communications with our partners in city enforcement to clear the alignment in a timely manner. You know, as as we get stuck or we're in these pre-planned or unplanned events, our OTP is drastically affected because we're stuck until these things are moved out of the way. Another recommendation would be to allow for signal preemption along the alignment. This allows for smoother traffic flow for the streetcar itself. We've also looked at creating dedicated right-of-way is another consideration that, again, would require further collaboration with the city. So that kind of highlights some of the topics that we saw with existing system enhancements. And again, it goes into detail in our report. With regards to the type of vehicle that should be utilized along the entire alignment, MARTA and Atlanta Beltline were both agreed with the use of a new hybrid vehicle. The city at this time has not provided us an opinion on the vehicle type to date. And the turf track analysis, with regards to that, we made the recommendation of the concrete embedded track. However, the Atlanta Beltline, their preference was to use it's a plinth with the rail boot that allows for additional track to be concealed with turf. It's aesthetically more pleasing, and but this is kind of in line with what they would like to see on their alignment on the Beltline itself. Currently, the city has not provided an opinion on the turf track type. And so with regards to the last item, public engagement and outreach approach was presented to the team, and both MARTA and Atlanta Beltline agreed with the current plan. However, the city wanted to pause any further public engagement efforts at this time. Next slide, please. So after discussion with both the city and Atlanta Beltline, it was determined that additional investigation needed to take place for vehicle analyses and turf track feasibility. If we were to expand the fleet, we're going to need to further explore costs related to vehicle maintenance facilities. What are the guidelines associated with reselling existing cars? And what is the cost of fleet expansion? With regards to the turf track, we were going to further investigate impacts by reaching out to transit agencies that currently have turf track. We wanted to understand maintenance costs, long-term maintenance costs. Months to deliver. And so we will be providing further updates as we complete the study holistically. And with that, I'd like to thank you and open to questions.
Thank you, AJ. Any questions from board members?
Well, I just want to add that thank you for the analysis that I've seen on the whole project. Is pretty detailed. I read through the turf analysis and all the different options that they want to consider, or that's being considered. I didn't even realize that you could even consider growing grass in between the tracks. But I thought that was quite interesting. But it was good to go through both reports on all the reports that I received on the analysis of what's moving forward with this feasibility of the expansion and some other things that's facing with the streetcar. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Pond.
AJ, there's been some prior discussion due to the cost of rail and the complexity of getting federal funding using other types of vehicles or other options other than a rail car for this corridor. Has that been a significant part of this study?
No, I don't believe so. I think some of those, I know that during the initial studies, those things were considered, but with headway capacity, there's numerous factors that played into why ultimately the streetcar was selected. And so probably go into more detail there, but there's, again, a lot of assumptions that go into those studies initially, and I don't believe that was part of our goal on these studies currently.
And one quick question, where would this project end? Where would be the termination point?
Termination point would be at Ponce City Market to the north.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, AJ. With no other matters to come before the Planning and Capital Programs Committee, I will adjourn that committee meeting. I will then turn around and convene the Operations and Safety Committee meeting. I want to be mindful of my colleagues' time and staff time. That was a really heavy PCP agenda. So we're going to try to do this as quickly as possible. Agenda item number 1 is approval of the minutes from November 21, 2024 Operations and Safety Committee meeting. Is there a motion?
This
Motion
is
to
Hardy.
approve, Williamson.
I'll second. I'll second Williamson.
Williamson moves, Ms. Hardage seconds. Any questions? Ms. Huff, please call the roll.
Roderick Frierson,
Here.
We're approving
I'm sorry.
the minutes.
Yeah, approve the meeting minutes. Yeah.
okay, Frida Hardage,
Approve.
Jennifer Ives,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Approve.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson,
Yes.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes. The minutes have been adopted. Moving on to agenda item 2 is a resolution authorizing the award of a contract for high rail trucks. Turn it over to Addie Matthew.
Right. Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Scott, Mr. McKinney, Mr. Greenwood, and members of the Operations and Safety Committee. My name is Adi Matthew, the Director of Maintenance of Way, and I'd like to direct your attention to agenda item number 2, IFB B50283. This is a resolution authorizing an award of a contract for the purchase of track maintenance trucks. Next slide, please. The branch of Track and Structures heavily rely on several specialty vehicles to maintain and repair MARTA's track assets. In this presentation, we will be seeking approval for 6 of these vehicles to improve the safety, effectiveness, and efficiency of the work conducted by the track and structure crews. Next slide, please. The F-250 pickup truck. This truck is used by track supervisors and structural inspectors to get to and from work sites, perform structural inspections, respond to emergencies, and attend other work-related events. This is the vehicle that's most nimble of our fleet. It is well suited for administrative duties as well as being on-track capable. This vehicle supports our track crews in performing essential maintenance, conducting inspections, and supporting the repair of track and structural assets. We currently have 4 of these vehicles in our fleet and that are shared between 12 track supervisors and 7 track inspectors. We are requesting 2 additional pickup trucks to adequately accommodate our current staff in performing their duties. Next slide, please. The service body truck. This is the workhorse of the fleet. Each day, this vehicle is used to deploy track crews to inspect the track as well as respond to wayside emergencies. This is the vehicle that carries small parts, tools, and equipment, gets work crews to their job sites, respond to emergency work such as rail breaks, tree and debris removal, storm coverage, and supports urgent flagging requests by other maintenance or capital groups. We currently have 5 service body trucks in service and are requesting an additional vehicle to increase coverage, reduce response time, and improve overall customer experience by reducing rail delays caused by emergency failures. Next slide. The tie loader. The tie loader is used to transport, install, and remove rail ties, and rail frogs. Rail ties are the rectangular support for the tracks, usually made of wood or concrete, laid perpendicular to the rails. With 104 miles of track and approximately 100,000 rail ties to maintain, we are constantly replacing rail ties due to wear or damage. The rail frogs are the section of rail that guide the vehicle from one track to the other, as seen in the image above. With only one tie loader vehicle in our fleet, our output is limited to working on one section of track each night when replacing ties. With an additional unit, we would double our output, covering two sections of track each night. Also, when one vehicle is taken out of service for maintenance or breaks down, tie replacement can continue as scheduled. An additional tie loader would greatly improve track safety, prevent slow orders, and improve ride quality with an increased capability to perform much needed track maintenance work. Next slide, please. Stake body. This is the multi-use support vehicle of the fleet. It is used to carry large tools and equipment such as generators, lights, pumps, tanks, and cranes, just to name a few. Its open bed design makes for easy loading and offloading of larger, heavier items. This vehicle is present on almost all out-of-track work as it can be loaded with whatever equipment the job requires. The stake body also is essential in debris removal from our many station rehab construction sites. We currently have 5 stake body trucks in service and are requesting an additional unit to allow increased support of our growing capital programs, as well as our required rail maintenance and rail repair obligations. Next slide, please. The vegetation sprayer. This vehicle is used to spray herbicide on the wayside, prevent small trees, bushes, and shrubbery from impeding the trackway, as well as walkways that may be used for maintenance and emergency purposes. We currently do not have a vegetation spray truck in our fleet and instead have used a stake body truck with a tank and a handheld sprayer on board. If you look on your screen there, you can see to the left, that's the vehicle that we currently use with a tank on board that is manually used by the technicians. Our current method is slow and cumbersome, as personnel must manually pump and spray the herbicide while standing on the back of the vehicle in motion. This method exposes personnel to an increased risk of injury and is simply inefficient. With the addition of a vegetation sprayer, personnel can operate the spray nozzles from inside the cab of the vehicle at a much larger volume and rate, covering a greater area each night. This addition increases the safety of the operating personnel and reduces wayside vegetation that may cause damage to our rail car fleet as well as our wayside equipment. And as you can see in the picture on the right, this is the automated vehicle that will spray that herbicide for us. All right, next slide, please. With the addition of these 6 vehicles, the Office of MOW aims to increase field coverage, allowing for reduced response times and reduced rail delays. These additions will increase work output by 25%. Track crews will now have the ability to perform major track maintenance in multiple sections of track simultaneously. Increased track maintenance avoids track slow orders, improves ride quality, and enhances the overall customer experience. Next slide, please. For these trucks, only 2 proposals were received. Technology International Incorporated for the 2 F-250 pickup trucks totaling $249,300, and Rush Truck Center Atlanta for the service body, vegetation sprayer, stake body, and tie loader totaling $1,315,304. The procurement total is $1,564,604. The audit report determined that this amount was fair and reasonable. The procurement is being funded with 100% capital funds approved in the FY25 capital budget. DBE participation was set at 0 since there were no DBEs in this industry in the Georgia DBE directory due to the specialized nature of these vehicles. At this time, I respectfully request the Operations and Safety Committee's approval of a resolution authorizing the General Manager or his delegate to enter into a contract with Rush Truck Center for $1,315,304 and Technology International for $249,300 for the purchase of 6 track maintenance trucks. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chairman, for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Matthew. Do I have a motion?
I move. This is Hardage.
Hardage moves. Do I have a second?
Second, Jones.
Ms. Jones seconds. Any questions? Hearing none, Ms. Huff, please call the roll for the vote.
Roderick Farson. Roderick Farson,
Approved.
Frida Hardage,
Approved.
Jennifer I,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Approved.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson,
Approved.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes. The resolution is approved. Agenda item number 3 is a resolution authorizing the modification and contractual authorization for on-call snow debris removal services. Mr. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Scott, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. McKinney, and members of the Operations and Safety Committee. My name is Sean Thomas. I'm the Director of Facilities within the Department of Mechanical Operations. If I may, I'd like to bring your attention to agenda item number 3. And this is a resolution authorizing a modification and contractual authorization for award IFB 47306, which is an active agreement for on-call snow and debris removal. Next slide. As an overview of today's discussion, some of the topics I will discuss will be providing a brief overview of the scope of work of this contract, some of the work performed to date, an analysis of the award and our expenditures, to be followed by a modification request. Next slide. So the contract was initiated in August of 2022, and it was implemented to help us resolve hazards using additional resources to quickly respond to various types of hazards resulting from inclement weather incidents that would otherwise disrupt revenue service. Of course, the past several years, that support has mainly consisted of tree work in the proximity of our wayside alignment, some of our aerial structures, detention ponds and whatnot, and other buildings throughout the system. And here in these images, you can see some pictures of some of the impacts from some of those collisions with our revenue fleet from various areas adjacent to the wayside. And as I mentioned, also there has been a lot of effort put forth with environmental compliance and clearing urban campsites as we try to be proactive in using this resource over the past several years that we have not had any actual snow. But next slide. So some of the work to date, specifically along some areas of the alignment here, you'll see some images of the East Lake Station area. You can see the before images to the left and the proximity to some of our trains passing on the aerial structure. And then the images to the right show one view looking towards Rocky Ford on that same aerial structure, and the other view looking east towards the actual station. And there were several other areas in the system that kind of presented some similar challenges, and Brookhaven to Chamblee, Indian Creek to Kensington, and H.E. Holmes Tail Track to name a few. Next slide. So as far as the award, contract B47306 currently has a contract value of $499,950, and we've utilized approximately 95% of that award in our efforts over the past 2.5 years. While we do have a replacement solicitation that is really close to being evaluated evaluated for award, there is an immediate need to ensure we have consistently have additional resources available to support us during inclement weather, such as the ones we're going through right now. So in closing, the Office of Facilities is requesting a modification in contractual authority with Good Choice Tree Experts to add $231,000 to B47306 for continued support of this snow and debris removal services. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time and consideration. I turn the floor back over to you, Chairman Worthy.
I move to approve. This is Hardage.
Hardage moves. Is there a second?
Pod seconds.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Hearing no questions, Ms. Huff, will you call the roll for the vote?
Roger Frierson,
Approved.
Rita Hardage,
Approved.
Jennifer I. Jennifer I. Segura Jones,
Approved.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson,
Approve.
Thomas Worthy.
Yes. The resolution is adopted. Mr. Thomas, the floor is yours for agenda item number 4 regarding refuse removal services.
Thank you, Chairman. And other than the fact that we're now at 12 o'clock and I can say good afternoon, otherwise I'll go right to, I would like to bring your attention to agenda item number 4, which is the resolution authorizing a modification and contractual authorization for award of IFB 38146. And this is an inactive contract agreement for authority-wide refuse removal services. Next slide. During today's discussion of this agenda item, I'll give a business purpose, a scope overview, a little background, overview of the award, and request for a modification. Next slide. So as a reminder, during the November Ops and Safety meeting, I presented a resolution regarding the current refuse removal agreement, and I noted that a future agenda item would be coming forth regarding closing out the previous agreement with Waste Management. And this agenda item will allow us to modify the contractual authority for B38146, which was with Waste Management, who provided refuse removal services for the authority between 2017 and 2024. Next slide. So the services provided under this contract consisted of routine refuse removal services of approximately 69 containers at 35 locations, using a variety of sizes and types of containers. And it also included some flexibility in emergencies or special events or will call pickups or what have you, to allow us to squeeze in extra services when needed. Next slide. So for some background on how we got here, the previous contract was awarded to Advanced Disposal in 2017. That firm was later acquired by Waste Management in 2020. Waste Management assumed the contract and continued providing those services from that time through 2024. Next slide. So the original agreement with Advanced Disposal was for $1,378,688.64. And this modification request is for an additional $58,095.05, which would bring the total contract value to $1,436,000 $1,783.69. So in closing, the Office of Facilities requests authorization to modify B38146 for refuse removal services with waste management for an additional amount of $58,095.05 for contract closeout. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your time and consideration and turn the floor back over to you, Chairman Worthy.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Do I have a motion?
This is Hardage. I move.
Ms.
Do I have
Frierson,
a
I second. Frierson, second.
It is moved by Ms. Hardage, second by Mr. Frierson. Any questions or discussion of Mr. Thomas? Hearing none, Ms. Huff, please call the roll for the vote.
Roderick Frierson,
Approved.
Rita Hardage,
Yes.
Jennifer Ide,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Approved.
Al Pond, I'm sorry, Sagira.
She approved.
That was an
Okay.
approved.
All right, Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Yes.
Valencia Williamson,
Approve.
Thomas Worthy.
Approved. The resolution passes. Agenda item number 5 is a resolution authorizing a modification in the contractual authorization for supplemental shuttle bus services. This relates to Operation Dovetail. Mr. Bruno.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Worthy, Vice Chair Scott, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. McKinney, and members of the Operations and Safety Committee. I'm Peter Bruno, Senior Director of Operations Planning and Controls. Please direct your attention to agenda item number 5. I am requesting committee approval of a resolution authorizing a modification in contractual authorization for supplemental shuttle bus services RFQ Q50465. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There you go. 3 weeks ago, the authority provided shuttle bus services through a contract with Georgia Coach Lines in support of President Carter's repose. We transported members of the public to the Carter Center who wanted to pay respects during this visitation period. Our 6-day operations plan began on January 1st with a 3-day mobilization, followed by shuttle bus services beginning on Saturday, January 4th at 6 p.m. This began an uninterrupted period of 60 hours with MARTA providing transportation for members of the public from King Memorial Station to the Carter Center. In spite of the cold and the rain, it was an unconditional success. Next slide, please. The original assumed operations plan, which formed the basis of our contract with Georgia Coach Lines, called for a shuttle service duration of 36 hours. Upon President Carter's passing, and after consultation with the military, Secret Service, and the White House, the Carter Center directed an operations plan which now called for 60 hours of shuttle service. The original assumed plan and contract totaled $188,625. With the increased duration of shuttle service, the cost rose to $236,000. This difference of $47,375 is the basis of the requested contract modification. Next slide, please. In closing, I am respectfully requesting approval of the resolution authorizing a modification in contractual authorization for supplemental bus services RFQ Q50465, which is for Operation Dovetail. And now I turn this matter back to you, Chairman Worthy.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno. Is there Ms. Hardage moves? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ms. Powers seconds. Mr. Bruno, I don't have a question. I just want to echo the appreciation of the board to you and your entire team, because I think your statement of unconditional success is absolutely accurate. As a Georgia native, I am very, very honored that we played a role in President Carter's funeral. I thought it was very fitting of our native son, and you played a huge role into it. So thank you. I give you my deepest appreciations and your team. Any questions or comments from the board?
No, this is Hardage. I just want to echo that as well. We were very, very, very impressed with all aspects of what we saw. Thank you very much.
Hearing nothing else, Ms. Huff, will you please call the roll for the vote?
Roger Frierson,
Approved.
Rita Hardage,
Yes, approve.
Jennifer I,
Yes.
Sagira Jones,
Approved.
Al Pond,
Yes.
Catherine Powers,
Approve.
Rita Scott,
Yes, and thank you.
Valencia Williamson,
Yes.
Thomas Worthy.
Approve. Thank you, Mr. Bruno.
Thank you.
Committee members, in your packet are informational items only, your FY25 October KPIs and FY25 November KPIs for you to review at your leisure. And with no other matters to come before the Ops and Safety Committee, I will adjourn our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Worthy. That will bring us to our External Relations Committee. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the November 21st, 2024 External Relations Committee meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
This is Hardage. I approve.
Pond second.
The motion has been properly moved and seconded by Hardage and Pond. Are there any objections to the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous consent of the attending members. We'll move on to the agenda item number 2, a briefing of government affairs update from Jennifer LaRosa, Senior Director of Government Affairs. Ms. LaRosa.
Hello, Chair Jones, Vice Chair Williamson, CEO Greenwood, and Mr. Parker and board members. Jennifer LaRosa, Senior Director of Government Affairs. I want to thank you for your time and give you a very brief update on the happenings under the Gold Dome thus far this session. Next slide. We are extremely fortunate to see a full adjournment calendar released so early. As you're likely aware, there are 2 very key dates in the legislative session. First is crossover day, which is going to be March 6th, typically day 28 of the session. All general legislation needs to be out of its chamber of origin to remain viable for the rest of that session. Local legislation is not subject to this rule, so that can be done throughout the rest of the session. Next would be sine die, the final day of the legislative session, and the last day any legislation can pass for the year. Being the first year of a biennial, as you all know, we can have legislation next year that didn't make it a crossover this year. Historically, the second week of session, the General Assembly holds joint appropriation hearings to hear from all of the state departments and authorities on their budget details and requests. Due to winter weather issues, all of these hearings were canceled this week, and we'll continue to monitor where those presentations might take place. However, we were able to get a peek into the governor's budget and see another record-breaking year for collections of the Transit Trust Fund at $38 million. This is up a little bit from FY25 32.4. We are looking to Commissioner McMurray to release these funds as he is the trustee of that fund. And the Atlanta region portion will go to the ATL and be dispersed from there. So we'll keep an eye on that and keep you posted of those situations. Next slide. Governor Kemp spoke at a number of events on his agenda last week. We can look forward to a lot of conversations on all of the items that you see here. I just want to talk a little bit about a few that sort of relate to us, and that's going to be tort reform. This is a very important issue to him and has been throughout his tenure. It's a very complex issue. It's been discussed quite extensively for many years and many sessions. Kemp did mention a special session if they were not able to find a resolution this particular legislative session. So I feel that this will be a conversation that will take up a lot of time and air in committees, but it will also look forward to either having something on this matter, or we will look forward to a special session sometime throughout the rest of the year. The next item I wanted to just dive a little bit into is mental health. This issue is visible in our system, and we work with many entities across the region to help those that we can. We will see a significant new investment in a range of programs that support both inpatient and outpatient mental health services. So we'll keep an eye on that and report those back to you to see how best MARTA can work with those entities and those funds. Next slide. As promised, we are making efforts to present to each of our state delegations. We did participate in a Clayton County delegation meeting that was called on January 7th by Chair Neal. The details were decided a little late, so we weren't able to get the invite to the board members in time, but if we do get the opportunity to present to them again, you will be the first to know. As our DeKalb board members are aware, we were scheduled to present to DeKalb the first week of the legislative session, and that was rescheduled for February 10th, and we expect to see you there. And lastly, we are making plans and nailing down some details to hold Transit Day at the Capitol on February 4th, which happens to be Transit Equity Day nationally, and a picture from last year of a few of you guys that were able to come join us and support us. So stay tuned for some details on that. Next slide. Because we did such an amazing job of this effort last year, the executive offices actually requested for us to provide the BRT simulation once again from the Capitol to and from the Georgia World Congress Center for Georgia Chamber's annual Eggs and Issues. Knowing how convenient and well organized the service is, you can see our VIP guest here didn't even bother with winter coats, as what I can attest to you was a very cold day. We would like to thank our partners at GBA, ATL-DOT, and APD for their partnership and efforts to make this successful yet again. Next year, I hope to just tell them to take the BRT. And I want to thank board members Scott and Frierson for joining us. We truly appreciate your support and presence, chatting with our state electeds and all things MARTA on the ride. Next slide. Again, thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. LaRosa. Mr. Pond?
Jennifer, I think the tort reform is important, and it's a perfect time to try to team up with like-minded other people with that agenda. I just want to throw out something. I know it's a long reach, but I think the ultimate solution is sovereign immunity. And I don't know how MARTA fits in with that, but certainly jurisdictions and other public entities are able to get rightful protection under sovereign immunity. So I would consider or suggest maybe we just explore the option of pursuing that, because it's probably a couple of year project at best. So,
Mr. Pond, thank you. Great point. I know that we're having multiple conversations with our higher electeds since we started talking about this conversation, and especially the premise liability. I do want to defer the answer to Mr. Hunt, and I saw his hand go up. I think he might have a few things to add on what we are trying to do versus what we're able to do.
Yeah, with our external affairs team, we've been engaging with legislators ever since Colleen's great MARTAC report last year, and so far the reception has been great. Sovereign immunity will be a challenge. Is it conceivably possible? Yes, it will be a challenge, but we're pursuing a multi tort reform front in MARTA's behalf: premises liability, sovereign immunity, and qualified caps on liability damages as well.
Thank you. Did that answer your question, Mr. Pond?
yes, thank you.
Ms. Scott?
I strictly have a comment. Thank you for the service, and MARTA was very well received, and thank you.
Thank you for your support and joining us. We always look forward to having you with us at those types of events.
Thank you. I was able to communicate with several of the elected officials that I know quite well. So thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ms. LaRosa?
Yes. Not a this is Valencia, not a question. I just wanted to let you know, Jennifer, that Clayton County Day at the Capitol is scheduled for February 6th. And MARTA has been on that agenda in years past. And so we'd like to extend an invitation this year also. I'll reach out to you separately related to that so that you can give a presentation to our group. Thank you.
Thank you. I was hoping you would say that since we couldn't get you guys in time for the delegation meeting. So thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments? None. Thank you, Ms. LaRosa. We'll move on to the next agenda item. We'll have a briefing of a marketing and communications update from Stephanie Fisher, Senior Director of Communications, and Shinette Kanita, Senior Director of Marketing and Sales. Ms. Fisher?
I'll actually start. Good afternoon, Chair Jones, Vice Chair Williamson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Parker, and the rest of the board members. My name is Shinette Kanita, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Sales. Since our last update in mid-November, marketing and communications have been hard at work with several meaningful and exciting initiatives. We closed out 2024 on a high note, bringing holiday cheer to our customers and employees. And at the start of this month, we were again honored to partner with the King Center to celebrate the 2025 King Holiday Observance. Following the passing of President Jimmy Carter, we acted swiftly to implement and communicate our robust viewing transportation plan, ensuring mourners and system riders were well supported during this historic moment. Next slide. Now, on November 21st, we hosted our second annual holiday market at West End, where we revealed our festive holiday wrapped bus and holiday sweaters. The event drew 200 plus attendees who enjoyed holiday music from DJ Say the Saint, free hot cocoa and apple cider, and the excitement of spinning the prize wheel to win a round trip fare loaded on our custom holiday themed Breeze cards. Next slide. We welcomed 4 local business vendors to sell their merchandise alongside the MARTA Market and Pop-Up Shop, where we offered our sweaters, socks, and Atlanta United retail collection, and the sale of these items brought in about $5,000. A standout moment came from I Got Bank, which is a youth-run financial literacy business. These young entrepreneurs viewed here energize the event by selling products that promote healthy financial habits for students. We're excited to feature more local vendors at future events. Next slide. Our holiday customer appreciation event on December 12th at HE Homes was also a great success. We attracted about 210 attendees. This was hosted by V103's Greg Street. The event featured exciting giveaways, MARTA trivia, and on-site support from our HOPE program partners to assist riders. It was a really wonderful way for us to engage with the community and spread holiday cheer. Next slide. On January 8th, we proudly unveiled our 2025 Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King bus wrap at the King Holiday Observance kickoff reception. In partnership with the King Center, we were honored to showcase this year's theme, and their theme this year is Mission Possible, Protecting Freedom, Justice, and Democracy in the Spirit of Nonviolence 365. And that's, you can see it here on displayed on our wrapped bus, and that really spreads a powerful message of hope, action, and possibility across the city. The MLK bus is operating on Route 3, and that's MLK Drive and Auburn Avenue. Next slide. Here's a photo of MARTA Board Chair Jennifer Ide, who was invited to deliver remarks on MARTA, standing with Dr. Angela Ferris Watkins, who is the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and staff from the King Center. Next slide. Jimmy Carter, who's our 39th president of the United States, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and Georgia's native son, passed away peacefully on December 29th at the age of 100, making him the longest-lived president in U.S. history. MARTA provided direct bus service from King Memorial Rail Station to the Carter Center, ensuring a smooth access for those paying tribute. I'd like to highlight some of the key collaborations and strategies we implemented to honor President Carter and support mourners and riders as he lay in repose at the Carter Center from January 4th through the 7th. Next slide. So our teams collaborated closely with Peter's team with the bus and rail operations, customer service, safety, MPD, and other essential team members to align on messaging and logistics for the event. So we implemented a robust digital marketing campaign to inform the public of transportation options and shuttle services. We also designed and deployed clear wayfinding signage to guide mourners and riders across the stations, ensuring that there was a seamless transit experience. We also delivered real-time updates to the news media and through social media to amplify navigation and just overall enhance the overall rider experience. Next slide. In our January e-newsletter, we included a dedicated section about President Carter to direct readers to a landing page with detailed information about our transportation plan. That's where we saw some really strong audience interest. We had over 24,000 opens. We had an engagement rate of 23.8%, that's our open rate. The email newsletter had a total of 505 clicks with focused interest in the Carter section with a total of 208 clicks. We also sent a standalone email on January the 2nd, and this was to provide our email audience with know before you go information and ensure that all riders were aware of what to expect that weekend. We saw an impressive reach of over 44,000 opens and a high engagement with a 43.2% open rate, which is way above our industry average of 30%. And that saw a total of 400 clicks. And lastly, our dedicated landing page received nearly 9,000 page views from January 1st through January the 7th. Next slide. President Carter's memorial content was displayed across all station digital signage and ensured there was widespread visibility honoring his legacy. Next slide. Wayfinding signage guided mourners to the free shuttle for the Carter Center and provided key event details, ensuring a smooth and dignified experience. Next slide. And half of the station screens played President Carter's memorial content 100% of the time, while others displayed it 75% from January 1st to January 7th. Digital screens at MARTA headquarters and bus garages featured his memorial image, extending the tribute to employees and partners. So in summary, the marketing communications team ensured President Carter's legacy was honored through thoughtful and wayfinding signage, seamless collaboration across all the departments, and a customer-first approach. Now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Stephanie Fisher, Senior Director of Communications, who will review the news coverage and social media results from this effort. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Jones, Vice Chair Williamson, Mr. Greenwood, Mr. Parker, and members of the External Relations Committee. As Chinette mentioned, I'm Stephanie Fisher. I'm the Senior Director of Communications. And Chinette and I and our teams worked very closely to ensure that the transportation plan for President Carter's viewing was shared widely. Next slide, please. We issued 7 press releases from January 1st to January 6th detailing that transportation plan. That resulted in over 600 mentions in just 6 days, most of those occurring on local broadcast news stations. The news coverage reached, on average, 175 million people every day, thanks mostly to Yahoo News and MSN.com amplifying those local stories. The AJC and WSB also had a large audience reach, while Fox 5 and WANF were among stations that mentioned MARTA the most. Mentions of MARTA's transportation plan in the news media peaked on Friday, January 3rd, in advance of our service, which began the next evening. And we at MARTA and our partners at the Carter Center pushed out the most information. Next slide. Our social media pages continue to be valuable platforms in sharing all kinds of information. We did find that traditional media rather than social media seemed to be more effective in sharing information in this case. Anecdotally, I think that may be due to the disparity in the average age of social media users and those interested in attending President Carter's viewing. But that said, our social media pages did receive over 130,000 impressions or views from January 1st through the 7th. Our posts had over 2,500 engagements, which would be somebody reacting or commenting. And the links in our posts that would take you to our website or the Carter Center's website for more information were clicked over 650 times. Next slide. And while our main goal through all of this was to share service information, we did take the opportunity to share personal stories from our customers, like this one you see here on social media. The gentleman holding the photos interviewed President Carter when they were both young men, and he was so gracious and thankful to us for transporting him to pay tribute to a president he greatly admired. Next slide, please. I'd like to take a moment now to tell you a little bit more about some of the upcoming events the External Relations team is working on and proud to be a part of. Next Thursday, January 30th, is the State of MARTA event, which will begin on the platform at Lindbergh at 8 a.m. with the unveiling of the new train and continue over at Uptown across the street from headquarters at 9 a.m. February is Black History Month, and we will mark the month with a campaign featuring and honoring our history-making employees, because MARTA history is Black history. MARTA will mark Transit Equity Day on February 4th, as you've heard from other members of the External Relations team, recognizing how equitable access to transit connects people to opportunity. Our public engagement team will arrange to have the historical bus staged at West End on that day from noon until 2. And as Jennifer mentioned, the Government Affairs team will be coordinating with transit advocacy groups for Transit Day at the Capitol. Public outreach efforts surrounding the Next Gen Bus Network begin this month, first one on Saturday, with 34 virtual and in-person meetings scheduled between January 25th and February 22nd. And we will launch our airport marketing and communications campaign with a focus on reaching travelers as they arrive at the airport and then directing them to the north or south entrances of Airport Station. And finally, the marketing and communications teams will promote the MARTA Merch website more heavily in the coming months, guiding people to the site to purchase unique MARTA branded items. I thank you for your time today, and Chinette and I are here to answer any questions.
You both. As always, thank you for spending so much time and being so willing to provide more accessible ways for people to get information about the system and the events. Quick question for you about the Next Gen Bus Network meetings. There are several different types of meetings in different municipalities. What is the difference between the open house, lunch and learn, and public meetings, if there's any?
I believe that it is the format. It's just giving people different opportunities. I believe that we just wanted to make sure that we wanted to have options throughout the day. So I think the lunch and learn more for those people maybe on their lunch break. The virtual ones, we've created a video where the presentation is on video that may be shown during those. So I think it's just to have different formats and different options for people that will best fit within their schedules and their lives.
Ms. Williamson, was your hand up?
It was, but I don't have a question. Sorry.
Are there any other questions or feedback? Are there any other matters to come before this committee? All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the information. Thank you so much.